I'm calling to order the Tuesday, June 4th, 2013 meeting of the Township of South Orange Village Board of Adjustment. May we have a roll call?
Yes, Mr. Don.
Here.
Mrs. Descalo.
Here.
Mr. Groman. Mr. Parlapiano.
Here.
Mr. Reeves.
Here.
Mrs. Semper.
Here.
Mr. Adler.
Here.
Mr. Shapiro.
Here.
And Ms. Werwin.
Here.
Pursuant to Section 5, Chapter 231, PL 1975, this is to state for the record that adequate notice of this meeting has been provided to the public by posting and maintaining the annual notice of regular meetings on the bulletin board in Village Hall, by publishing the annual notice of regular meetings for 2013 in the December 2012 edition of the South Orange Maplewood News Record, and by filing said notice in the office of the village clerk. So the first thing we do this evening is approval of the minutes for the special meeting on April 23rd, and then we move on to the Tuesday, May 7th minutes. So we have the April 23rd minutes. That's where we approved the resolution for Tishner Avenue for the construction of the two-family house. And we heard the application for the new house on 5th Street. And do we have any comments about these minutes? They've been revised. You've seen them in your email. Different people have made comments. I know Mr. Adler has made several comments on them, and they're incorporated. And I made a few comments on both of them, and I have the final version here. I think it accurately reflects what was the business that was carried on.
I agree.
Any questions? Problems? Okay, so may we have a motion?
I move to accept the minutes as amended.
I'll second.
Okay, Mr. Don.
Yes.
Mr. Descalo.
Yes.
Mr. Parlapiano.
Yes.
Mr. Reeves.
Yes.
Mrs. Semper.
Yes.
Mr. Adler.
Yes.
Mr. Shapiro.
Abstain.
And Ms. Werwin.
Abstain.
Okay, so then we move on to the next minutes of our regular meeting held on Tuesday, May 7th. Do we have any questions about that? Again, that went through a series of small revisions. I know I made some, Mr. Adler, and I think Mr. Dunn, you made some as well. And you had the final version in your inbox. Do we have any questions?
I think this was the one with the one question about the sentence that you were asking about, Bob, as to whether the...
Yeah, I checked back on what I had sent for my edits, and that I had not asked that it be deleted, and I think Jenna put it back in.
Okay, yeah, because I think it's kind of important to have that in there, because we did make it very clear on the record that we were not voting on a generic approval, we were voting on the specific proposal that was in front of us.
So I'm pretty sure Jenna put it back in.
Yes, yes.
Yes, it's in there, yep.
Okay, with that being said, may we have a motion?
I'll move that we accept the minutes as amended.
Second.
Okay, Mr. Don.
Yes.
Mrs. Descalo.
Yes.
Mr. Parlapiano.
Yes.
Mr. Reeves.
Yes.
Mrs. Semper.
Yes.
Mr. Adler.
Yes.
Mr. Shapiro.
Yes.
And Ms. Werwin.
Yes.
Okay. So just to clarify for any members of the public who came here expecting to hear 4 cases, we won't be hearing 4 cases this evening. Just to go over the order of things, the first case we'll hear is the continuation of LOJ Properties at 301 South Orange Avenue. And next will be Seton Hall University. And then the latter cases, Mr. Molinaro on Church Street has been carried at their request and with the ability to continue the length of time that we have to decide, because we're going to see them again in July at their request. So that will be carried. And they will be, assuming we get through the 2 cases tonight, they would be the first on the docket for July. And then after that, Fairview LLC which is at 310 to 318 South Orange Avenue, would be second on the docket for July. And again, they asked to be carried to the July meeting. Okay. So with that, we'll start out with a continuation of the case we were hearing last month. This is 301 South Orange Avenue. Mr. Friedland was the attorney. Mr. Friedland?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, council, and members of the board. I'm not going to go into detail with respect to what happened in our hearing of May the 7th. I believe everything was covered in the memorandum that I submitted.
He's not hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
The memorandum that we submitted in response to the requirement of the board at the conclusion of the last hearing. I have reviewed the response of Mr. Dwyer, and I just reiterate that we have offered a number of very reasonable, forthright, and proper resolutions in order to have any condition that you're looking at passed upon and granted. Now, the issue was whether or not this board has the authority to pass upon the propriety of conditions imposed specifically by the applicant. My memorandum, and to some extent Mr. Dwyer's memorandum, indicates that you absolutely have the right to do so, you have the power to do so, and under some circumstances you have the obligation to do so. And I'm ready to answer any questions. We have Mr. Keller here, and of course the applicants are here to respond.
Okay. Do we have any questions of Mr. Freeland or Mr. Keller? You all, again, we received both your letter and we received Mr. Dwyer's letter. I assume that we've read this. They were both thoughtful letters, and they bring up the interesting question as to the imposition of conditions versus the applicant volunteering to encumber their own property.
Is it, there are some questions I wouldn't mind asking, but we're not reopening testimony here, is that correct?
No, we're not going to, that's
right,
not
this is not-
necessary.
I didn't think so,
No,
but I
that's
wasn't
right.
sure.
No, I don't want to reopen
No,
testimony here.
I didn't either.
Why don't we let Mr. Dwyer summarize his letter?
Oh, okay, Mr. Chairman, the question was whether or not the voluntary consent for the applicant to limit the scope and other manner of his variance as a means of reducing the negative impacts, lessening the detriment to the zone plan, lessening the detriment to the neighborhood, would help the board decide in favor of the variance application, and whether or not there was any case law that would support that. As we know, the cases say generally variances run with the land. They're not supposed to be personal. The Stop and Shop case had a variance for one use category, allowed all the uses in that category to exist. So the question before the board was if the applicant was self-imposing fewer uses, a narrower scope of use with more conditions such as number of employees, hours of operation, etc. Would that be sufficient to help the board decide in favor of it, finding that reduced the negative impacts, provided, of course, it met the positive criteria that it was particularly well suited for the use.
And
Didn't your memorandum indicate that you quoted from Professor Cox, and Professor Cox said, yes, many times that's what should happen?
Cox has argued in favor in certain circumstances,
Right.
yes.
Thank you.
And specifically with regard to converting the carriage house, for example, into a senior home for aged parents for a short period of time, is an example he quotes.
And as a coda to what we were talking about, I had suggested, and I believe that you agreed with it, that we would record a deed from both of them to one of them, and which would incorporate each and every resolution and set forth with respect to the conditions that this board will impose. We're willing to do that, which in fact, if we did that, it would prevent an innocent purchaser from ever claiming he didn't know what was going on, because you got to do a search when you buy property, and it stands out like a sore thumb.
Which was interesting because that's what the applicant in this case claimed.
I'm sorry?
It's interesting because that's what the applicant in this case claimed.
But my concern, remember we asked Mr. Dwyer and Mr. Friedland to come up with this because we couldn't make a decision the last month. My concern with this was this differentiation between imposition of conditions by the board on use, which the courts have apparently routinely struck down, versus the applicant voluntarily restricting their use in the deed, and whether that can be maintained when the next person purchases it. How is that functionally different than us imposing it? And Mr. Dwyer says, well, in fact, it is different.
Well, I think that it would run with the land once it's recorded, and it would give people notice. And I would also suggest that any changes to that variance would have to come back to the board. Any change in use on the property would have to come back to the board. The board would want to hear it. The board would
Exactly.
want to retain jurisdiction over that, and that would be part of what's recorded. But the distinction between self-imposition and the board imposing was, I think, one thing that Cox seems to feel is a distinction worth thinking about. There's limits upon what the board is able to do. And there's the case that says, there are plenty of cases which say, and there's the Wire case I cite in my memo about the board saying it can only be this user for this use. And those were the conditions for use variance, and that was struck down. But I think that an argument can be made, and the board could find that when an applicant volunteers to limit the scope of the variance as a means of reducing the impact to the neighborhood and to the zone plan, that it's something worth considering.
And indeed, Professor Cox so stated that. And he went on for quite a while explaining his position.
And you're saying that there are cases where this has happened?
I'm saying there's not a lot of case law where this has happened.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I'm saying there's not a lot of case law I could find that has uphold that type of reasoning. I think there's a certain appeal to the logic of it. I know Cox has argued for it, but I don't see a lot of cases out there. I didn't see
Well,
any.
there aren't that many, but I mean, it's clear from what I researched and reading Professor Cox and your response that the owners of property are free to suggest and impose conditions in order to assist the board in granting a variance that is fair, proper, and respects the rights of adjoining property owners and members of the public.
I have a question.
Of whom?
I'll ask it to Mr. Dwyer to start. Assume that we go ahead with this, and 2 years from now, they do move into the house. Does that change, because then they could be looked at as a home office, obviously not complying, but it would be more in compliance.
Much easier.
Right.
Right.
Would that have any effect on the deed restriction at that point, or would it only be when they're no longer, when this current owner is no longer the owner?
It wouldn't change with ownership. It wouldn't change with them not being there or being there.
It goes with the land.
It would run with the land to the extent that it does. But I suggest that if there's ever a change to be made, that it comes back to this board. For example, it may be a future owner may say, I don't want this restriction. I don't even want this variance, and they can come back to the board and say, remove it. And I want that option to be available. And there's some,
But someone could come back and say, I want this to be a single-family house.
right, because there was, The thinking in the wire company case, remember, was the court was saying we don't want to unnecessarily restrict land from being conveyed easily. This might be considered by an owner to be a restriction.
Right.
You may want to remove it.
Right.
And
So-
the way to do that would be go back to the board.
How would the deed restriction be written? Because the deed restriction would have to be written in such a way that no matter how many times property changed hands, it would still stand, which could be done, I've seen plenty of that. But how would it be written in such a way that unless the zoning board changes the decision or the condition?
Oh,
Yeah.
any future change in use would retain jurisdiction by the board. Any
Right, that's
application-
always true, but you're right,
Yeah.
you make it
But it would
explicit.
be on their deed.
It would be in the land record, so it showed up on a title search.
And in fact, the resolution imposing the conditions and granting the variance would be annexed to the deed and referred to it by reference.
No, I
So
understand.
you'd have to see it and read it and understand it.
I don't know, I certainly understand how it would be seen, I just don't know how it would be changed. That was the question. So it just would say in it that it could be changed by decision of the zoning board of adjustment.
It could only be changed by decision of the board.
But the probability exists that he or she wouldn't be very successful, because the board could take the position, and justifiably so, Mr. Purchaser, you read this, you had counsel, you saw the deed, you saw the resolution, what are you coming back here for now? You know
Well-
exactly what you can and cannot do with this property.
I wouldn't go there.
There's no shortage of people that do that.
Say that
That's
again?
right.
There's
Well,
no
frankly,
shortage of
the-
people.
The case in
I
front
know
of us
that.
is
I-
that case.
Right.
So I wouldn't go there, right? Because the case in front of us is a case where good research would have shown that there was no use right on this piece of property, right? So yes, it's making it more explicit.
Could you talk into the,
Yeah, if there had been more research when this house was sold, the owner, the buyer would have known that use of the back part as an office wasn't permitted.
well, I mean, if a prospective purchaser came to me and said, can I buy this property? And I looked at the deed and I looked at the annex resolution, I would say, if you want to use this for
I
an
understand.
agency for home health care, limited to 3 employees, limited to certain hours, then you can buy it. But otherwise, I would recommend that the client walk away. It's clear.
Actually,
Well,
I
and
don't
that-
think
and
it's
that leads
clear
me-
at all. I think it gets to this distinction between us imposing conditions, saying you can only use it as a home health care agency, in which case, reading Mr. Dwyer's letter,
And
that would
adminis-
just be shot down by the
That's
court
right,
and say
an
that's
administrative
nonsense.
office for a home health agency
But
with
on
3
the
of
other
us
hand,
employees.
if the applicant agrees to make their own deed restriction, Mr. Dwyer argues that that's legal.
Right, now how about subsequent owners?
Well, it runs with the land, so the subsequent owner could open a home health care agency too, but we would have to trust that because it's kind of like an easement, a restriction, that they don't get additional uses that they would if we limited it. That's the trust that we would have to have in this.
I mean,
Would this be tantamount potentially to like voluntary spot zoning?
It's kind of how it feels.
No, I think spot zoning only occurs if the municipality imposes a change of use, which is not in keeping with the neighborhood use. We're not changing the law. We don't have the power to do that.
You know, I mean, I think the memos were clear, and I really appreciate the memos, because I think the specific question we asked last time, can this be done? I feel like we have very good guidance now on
Thank you.
whether it can be done. I think the questions now for us are is it good zoning? And to go back to the basic job of this board, which is to balance the positive criteria, the negative criteria. What we've been focusing on in this instance is, are there ways to mitigate the negative impact of this change on the zone, since they're asking for what is, you know, really the biggest change we can approve, which is a use change within a zone, right? And so I think what we've got now is advice that we have the authority, and that there is a way, through the applicant voluntarily adding a restriction, to mitigate the door we're opening if we were to grant the variance, and really to restrict it to what feels to me like it's hard to imagine there's another business out there that is an administrative office for a home health agency with less than 3. There aren't going to be many of those, right? So really close that door down. But we still have to do the basic work, which is to look at the positive criteria, to look at the negative criteria, to look at the site plan issues, and to balance those, considering the minimized negative impact by this restriction.
With the issues that you have just discussed, I would like Mr. Keller to address any significant problems that you may have. He testified last time.
Well, I guess that's why I started out by asking about testimony, because we had testimony last time, and it's minuted about the positive and negative criteria. And I wonder I suspect that where we are right now isn't the board discussion.
Yeah, we're in the board
We have a planner.
Well, I want to hear from our planner on this, but we're in the period of our board discussing. Mr. Keller told us the positive and negative criteria as he saw it. So I think we're through with that at this point.
I can't see why, if we're not into testimony, I can't see why it's necessary to actually go that way. I think that what we should be looking at right now is what we have asked the 2 attorneys to do. We have sent them away. They have written us. We have the information, and based on what is written to us, we have read it. That is what is before us. That is why we decided to come back here.
I want to hear from Ms. Gruhl if you have any particular opinion on this matter.
I would just ask the board a couple of questions. I don't
Speak
have
into the
any-
microphone.
I'm sorry. I would just ask the board a couple of questions. I think there was an argument made that this is an inherently beneficial use. I don't believe that it is. I think the board has to make that decision. Based upon whether it's an inherently beneficial use, that's a different standard than one would have to use if it were a traditional D variance with this situation. So I kind of expressed my opinion the last time from a planning perspective, and I think I would only suggest that the board, as you always do, thoroughly evaluate the positive criteria and the negative criteria unless you choose to, not as an inherently beneficial use and not with the balancing test.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up question though. That in your extensive experience attending board meetings, have you seen this kind of treatment done to an individual application?
No.
Would any of this line of inquiry, could it be addressed to Mr. Keller, who could respond? Because the issue of a Sika case was raised last time, and perhaps...
He raised the issue saying it was inherently beneficial. He made that point.
Actually, I didn't, just to clarify. I didn't state...
Oh, so now you're getting into testimony. What you said, you did say that it was inherently, you made the argument that it was inherently beneficial.
I went back and I listened to the testimony again, just to be sure. What I had stated, I did read the standard for an inherently beneficial, and in the end I said it's about as close as you can get to being inherently beneficial without being the obvious cases. And then I went through very specifically the proofs as a straight D1 variance, the positive, the particular site suitability, other sections of the Land Use Act that were advanced. And I know you said it particularly irks you when people make that argument. I thought it was important to know what the business was about, but I specifically did go through the proofs that are appropriate for a straight D1 variance on the positive and negative criteria. I didn't just rest solely on an inherently beneficial argument. I don't need to testify. I just wanted to make that clear that I did offer that.
All right. Mr. Adler.
Pat's memo talked about, among other things, hours of operation. I don't remember, I could have missed it, an offer by this applicant that the hours of operation would be limited. Was there such an offer?
I don't remember one either. I just thought it's something the board might want to think about.
Mr. Adler, I don't think that was addressed at the first. If you're asking, was there testimony about that?
testimony or stipulation offered?
I don't think we got to that point.
I don't believe there was testimony, but my clients would certainly consider stipulating to certain hours being open and
If
closed.
we get further down the road, we'll
Sure.
address that. All right, other questions? What about the positive and negative criteria? Does anybody have an opinion on that?
I think it just, if I may, Mr. Chairman, when the argument for inherently beneficial came up last time, I thought, at least it was in my thinking, that would be a unique application for this type of use, given that it was a commercial enterprise.
I don't think the board, except I think maybe Ms. Lauren thought it was inherently beneficial, but I don't think the majority of the board bought the argument that this was inherently beneficial, an administrative office for a home health agency.
May I see if I can explain one other thing? Mr. Adler brought up a certain issue. We would stipulate to limit at any time only 3 employees, and there would not be anything more than 771 square feet utilized in the proposed office in the rear.
What's the 771 square? That's the addition. That's that.
I'm sorry?
That is the addition, right?
Actually, it's the usable
usable
space.
area.
Usable space.
Corridors, bathrooms,
So-
storage space.
It's
doesn't-
it's calculated by, by our ordinance
Okay, well,
based on cells.
look, I think we need to decide now. We know the arguments. We can certainly come, if we want to go down this road that Mr. Dwyer suggests, that's what we need to decide, yes or no. And if we are going down that road, well, then we start putting in perhaps some conditions about hours of operations and employees. But it's not an imposition. It's the applicant volunteering to
Self-imposed?
self-impose their own deed.
And I don't want to argue with the chair, but I don't think I'm trying to suggest that the board should make that decision. I'm just saying that there might be reasonable argument for that conclusion if the board should reach it.
Okay.
You know, you guys okay?
Mr. Parlapiano.
The positive criteria that I took from the testimony last meeting was that the site is well suited for the use, that it's a low intensity use, that there's parking on the site that's adequate for the use. You know, that's the testimony I heard. Now,
Just to clarify, I think there isn't adequate parking.
I'm just saying, I think the testimony was, you know, it's obviously a positive business, but, you know, once that argument passed, it was the site suitability. Now, my reaction to that would be, first of all, the design of the addition with a bay window and wooden doors, to me, isn't particularly scream office. I'm not to say that it's not a good, you couldn't turn the space into office, but it fits well from a streetscape perspective. It reads residential to me as much as it reads office. And the second is that the parking is cramped, and the site from a density perspective is overbuilt already. And so I think, you know, there's an historical argument to say this has been used as an office, but I'm not sure that if those are the positive criteria, to me, they are not strong.
What about the positive, let's just open up the other issue. Is it a positive criteria to say, if this were clearly just a house in the middle of Montrose instead of on the border, and there wasn't this awkward addition that was used legally or illegally, but certainly abandoned as a chiropractor's office, there'd be no question here. The board would say, no,
I think that's
no way.
correct.
So what is it that we fear here about saying no to this application? Is it that we fear that it's going to be turned into a frat house or a dormitory for students like it's been in the past and like apparently it is currently? Is that what we fear, and that this is a lesser evil to allow a home health agency, which is that fit in positive criteria? Do we?
Well, there's a.
Well, I think that that's maybe what's in the back of our minds, and if it is, I think you should
Let's put it on the
acknowledge
table,
that.
that's right, that's right.
I think the location, from my point of view, has a lot to do with it. Because it's an oddball site on a corner across the street from a park, so it's not in the middle of a residential neighborhood. Across the street is certainly not a single-family residential neighborhood, across South Orange Avenue. South Orange Avenue is not a prime single-family residential zone. So I do see it as a piece of property that is making a turn into a residential zone. And way back when the zones were made, South Orange Avenue was a much smaller,
different
less
place.
heavily
So
trafficked.
turn that into a positive.
I think that this building, in its proposed use of a single, let's call it a house and an appendage, low-intensity office use, is a good transition on that corner from South Orange Avenue, which I don't consider to be a residential street, to the street on the park, which is much more of a transition into a residential street. And even that is not strictly a residential street, because you've got parking on that street all the time for people who don't live there.
Right.
So that's how I can see the positive in this. And it's really based on the location and the site itself.
I don't think the issue that you spoke about with respect to parking is burdensome, because I think the parking right now is used by the students who live in the front, and where that really belongs to the office. And I think that if there's some restriction with respect to the usage, I think the workers there are going to use that parking. So I've looked at it, I don't see that as a problem, because all the other kids who live in that neighborhood, park their cars on the street or find some place to park. So I don't think the parking is an issue at all.
And if the other thing that we would need to consider is if, because we had a similar house across from South Orange Middle School where they wanted to make it a business, and we told them to go away. It was a differently constructed house. I think we thought it was more clearly entirely residential. But there's the question of why don't they knock down this appendage? Why don't they knock down a wall and just make it a bigger single-family house? That's something that we have to acknowledge here, that if we approve this.
I think that's right, and one of the things I'm left with, I really do appreciate the applicant offering this very restricted use. I mean, the applicant is clearly going as far as they can go to mitigate the negative impact. But the problem is, it's effectively a class of one. And at some point, this business will either outgrow the space if it's very successful, or just go away. The house will be sold. And what happens then? We're going to be facing this exact same problem, where the choice will be the use variance won't help. We'll be facing either taking it down, integrating it with the house to make it truly fit with the zone, or coming back for a new single-purpose use variance again. So I think, in a sense, this is kicking the can down the road.
Oh, I think
And that's a
definitely,
fine tradition in American government. What's wrong with that?
I think that's definitely.
Well, it may be, and I'm not saying that, to me, if that's what we're doing, and we know that's what we're doing, maybe that's the right thing to do, right? I do think this is not a long-term solution to the problem of this property. This property is a problem because of it's sitting in a residential zone, and we don't permit business uses in the zone.
But without going back to testimony, we heard that that could be easily solved, because the applicant said, they stated after the business you know, what they're willing to do there. If the business grows, what they're willing to do with it. They have kids, they can turn it into a single family home, or they can live there. So it's not a case which part they're saying, well, you know, we walk away from this, and what happens. They're saying, look, in addition to what they're willing to do, they're saying, you know, I am also thinking that I can make this into a structure for my family or myself. So it's not a case of walking away.
I think in the long term, we would be more likely to see someone that was going to act like the prior person with the chiropractic office in there. I think most likely that's what we would see again, which is, like everyone has stated, more consistent with what we would be looking for. I think with a deed restriction, we're not going to see another application like this exactly. It would be probably more consistent with how we wanted to see the property used, or how the zoning wants to see the property used.
I think Michael's absolutely right. I think we are kicking the can down the road. And in this case, I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing with this site. Because I think we'll absolutely, if we're still here
This is
on the
coming
board
back.
long enough, we'll be
This is
back.
coming back.
Yeah. It may be 15 years from now, but it'll be back.
You're saying you think that that's okay?
I'm saying that I think that that's okay.
I personally don't agree with that. I think that this is something that in my fairly
Speaking to,
in my fairly extensive career in planning, and I've been to probably thousands of planning meetings.
Still waiting.
Still not talking enough into the mic.
Sorry about that. In my extensive career in planning, I've never seen a case where an applicant was able to, in effect, change the zoning through conditions on their approval on their own. I've certainly seen where a board has imposed conditions, enforceable or not. And by the way, I don't think that any of these conditions are really enforceable. But to do something like that for an applicant, where an applicant, you know, says, you know, I'll do this and I'll do that and I'll do the other thing. Basically, we're going to have a lineup of applicants saying how they're going to change their application, or what kind of conditions they're willing to accept in order to get their approvals from us. And I personally don't want to have to see that line of applicants seeing what they can get away with. I think that this particular application has a tremendous amount of merit. The applicant has good intentions. They're certainly willing to make their property almost unsellable through conditions of deed restrictions, which is another concern that I have, is that later on down the line, some future owner can say, you created a situation where I can't, or actually they could come if they want to sell the property, or I can't sell my property, because nobody wants a property that has this specific use. You know, they can't utilize it that way.
well, I'm not sure, to be fair, I don't think it's unsellable. The current homeowners bought the property. It's just that they wouldn't be able to use it as a home health agency. You could still use it as a single-family home.
Or a home office.
If you gave it.
I guess as a home office.
Well, they'd have to have a variance for that,
Or meet the conditions in the
or meet the
ordinance.
conditions under the ordinance. But go ahead.
I just think that if there's going to be conditions placed on this property as a result of a variance, it needs to be put on by us and not by the applicant. And I think it's a good use. I think it's a transitional zone. Honestly, it's, as Mr. Don said, you're talking about a commercial non-residential area. It's going into a park and a residential area. Certainly if it was in the middle of Montrose and somebody wanted to put in an addition that you could put 700 plus square feet of office space in there, we wouldn't approve it. But this is an existing space. I would have liked to have seen, and I know that I asked for some proof that it was a legal non-conforming space, but absent that, I think that we just have to vote on the merits. I'll say that if we vote to impose conditions that are proposed by the applicant, or the applicant puts deed restrictions on the property, I will vote against such an application.
You would vote against
Yes.
it.
So, but you are saying that if the board undertakes imposing those same conditions, you will accept them?
Depending on the conditions, I'd have to hear all those conditions, but yeah. And if, we've put conditions restricting hours. You know, we've put conditions restricting use. I would think that would be okay. It's not inconsistent with what we've done in the past.
Is that really the question before us, though? Excuse me, I was under the impression that the question before us is whether the applicant had the right and whether it would stand up in terms of the applicant imposing the conditions, and that I thought I heard that there was serious doubt as to whether the board had the authority to do that, and that has not been briefed or researched.
Yes, it has. With all due respect, it has.
So the board has the authority, same
No,
authority as the applicant?
If you read my memorandum, I addressed that in as much detail as the law allows. And we came to the conclusion the board does have that authority to do so. And frankly, and under some circumstances, it has the obligation to do so in order to protect and ensure the entire good standing and benevolence of the municipality. Do you want to say something?
Please, Mr. Descalo, we can jointly sponsor
They can't hear.
I mean, essentially, we could jointly sponsor these conditions. I mean, the board could require them, we're offering them. I don't see the distinction. You can still require them. I think actually in the Stop and Shop case, part of the problem was that they never imposed any conditions in any of the approvals. That was part of the problem. I think this board can certainly put them in. It's the same thing. We've stipulated to them. So I think in a sense, we are co-sponsoring them, and I think you can get comfort in that. And then it's further recorded, so
That's exactly the problem. Now you're abolishing that distinction between imposition and an offering. And my reading of Mr. Dwyer's memo was that when the board imposes these sorts of limited uses, that the courts strike it down.
Yeah, and the case is not Stop and Shop. The case is Soho Park and Land is the case in question there, where the board imposed a condition for a single use and a subsequent owner asked for relief, and the court struck the restriction and returned it to a straight D variance.
And it turned into what?
The court excised the conditions on the variance.
Was that the doctor's case in Cranford?
Well,
Soho, the Wire case, the memo?
Yeah. Because in that case, the applicant complained that he didn't like the conditions. That's really that's not what's going to happen here.
Okay.
I just don't think it's likely that if an applicant imposed their own restrictions voluntarily, that they would then try to sue to have them removed. It's almost like an estoppel argument.
Subsequent owner.
It's the next
The next owner. But they're still buying with knowledge.
Right.
So I don't know that they could.
Right.
I mean, arguably, they should be buying with knowledge with respect to zoning, but it's not necessarily custom and practice for purchasing counsel to always do zoning research.
What if the applicant, I'm sorry, what if the applicant came to us and they'd already had the deed restrictions on the property?
What were they looking for?
Why would they come?
I'm saying that the same applicant came to us and they had the deed restrictions that they're proposing now. It was already on the deed. How would we be looking at it then?
You're talking about the next owner who wants to change it?
No, the current applicant, if they had come to us with the deed restrictions already in place. Say we denied them, they put deed restrictions on the property and they came back. And they said, well, that's no longer an issue, we have deed restrictions on the property.
I may have addressed that in the last paragraph of my memo with respect to the Sousa case. It's
Still contrary to the zone, so they wouldn't be permitted.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that would be tantamount to allowing people to self-zone their property.
That's kind of where I'm going.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And I think it's for me, it's a real concern. And I think you're right about the line out the door of people saying, well, I'll put this condition on, I'll put this condition on.
Right.
And addressing really the negative criteria, but not the positive, right? And I do think, actually, Mr. Don, I think you've made, I mean, your point about the suitability of the site as a transitional site, which I know is your point as well, is probably the strongest positive statement about why this is appropriate.
The complexion of the neighborhood is not going to change. It is not going to change negatively. It's not going to change. You have a building right now with no one in it. You have a building that's going to look the same, and nobody going to know that they're going to be there because they're going to be there for a particular period of time. The complexion of the place is not going to change. So we are sitting here conjecturing, is there going to be parking? Is there going to be 1,000 people or whatever it is? It's not. No, I'm just conjecturing. It's not going to happen. It's just going to be folks in and out as it has been, empty, just with bay windows, and you might see some life in it, which is going to be better for the neighborhood.
Okay, I think we've pretty much made the various points. It's not an easy decision. Does somebody want to venture forth a motion?
Well, I would, but I want to just want to get a better understanding. I would like to put forward a motion to approve the application based on certain conditions. I just want to talk about what those conditions would be. And not ones necessarily linked to deed restrictions by the applicant. And if we've,
So you're thinking it could be enforced if we imposed it, as opposed to Mr. Dwyer's memo.
Mr. Dwyer's
that
memo
said-
says it cannot be enforced if we impose it.
I'm not sure that either can be enforced unless you're talking about when they go to sell the property.
Well,
So the buyer of the property could buy the property with full knowledge that they're not supposed to do something and do it anyway.
Well,
God knows we've seen that kind of thing
That's not-
before.
of course that anybody could do that.
Right.
The question is would this variance that's self-imposed upon a deed, is that enforceable? Mr. Dwyer suggests that it is, though he doesn't have actual cases. He's said that it has happened, and I trust him.
I'm thinking it's less objectionable, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
I think it's enforceable in that at the point of sale, that the buyer is going to be aware and they'll be in charge of enforcing those conditions. That's the only way that I can see that it's enforceable. Is there another way that outside that's different than what a regular variance would be enforceable?
No.
So let's talk about the kind of variance conditions that we've allowed in the past, enforceable or otherwise, that aren't going to get us a court case and have us lose in court with the next property owner.
Time of day,
Time of day, right?
and the usage,
And the type of usage. Do we get into trouble when we say a low office use?
we're not saying low office use. There's specific language on the table, which is an administrative office for home health care with 3 or less employees, right? That's what we're talking about here, right? It's not home office use. It's very specific.
Okay. So is that something that we'll get in trouble with the courts with this basic stuff, right?
So I
There's
used to,
no guarantee that someone might not want that use in the neighborhood. Any use variance is subject to an appeal. The argument in favor of it being that this is not as objectionable as granting a use variance for office use and having the next owner expand it to a different office use, which is much more intensive.
Right. So
and I also believe, as the board would said many times, that if we look in the audience, there are no objectors with respect to the density and the overpopulation, the overusage. That's why I'm suggesting time of day and usage. I don't think that if there are 3 employees in the office and the UPS guy shows up we're gonna say, oh, there are 4 employees in the office. Or if someone drops in and it becomes a 5th person, I don't think that's overcrowded. So I think that usage is better than restriction of the number of people at the door. I think they're strictly to this business of home care. Because it was said, testimony, that there's no major traffic, most of the work is done outside the office. I think that the reason I say that, to now have it like that and suddenly there's a doctor's office there that we don't know about, you know, or some other kind of business taking place within that environment. So that's why I'm saying time of day and the type of business. Don't take it from what it is and make it a chiropractor's office.
Right. And we're already, by default, restricting the square footage
That's right.
to the plans as proposed.
Right, it's on the plan.
Right. So I'm going to volunteer you, Mr. Semper, to make a motion with very clear conditions and see how it flies.
I propose that we approve this application based on time of day, specifically between the hours probably, I would say 9 to 7, or 9 to 6, 9 to 7, especially in the winter time, 9 to 7, and it be restricted to the home health care business environment.
Are you proposing that we restrict it or that the applicant?
The applicant.
The applicant is, you're noting that the applicant is volunteering to offer a deed restriction. Is that what you're proposing?
No, I'm not going with a deed restriction. Well, if that's the only way.
Is that the problem?
Is that the problem?
No.
All right.
No.
Go
I
ahead
mean,
then.
it's
But then I'm
to
gonna-
protect both the board and
Well,
the community to make sure
but
it's
then no
part
deed
of the deed.
restriction.
I think it should
I
be
mean,
part of the deed.
Is it a problem if he doesn't say it's tied to the deed?
He can.
I mean, isn't it tied to the deed anyway? Any variance, isn't it tied to the deed anyway?
It is, but in order to make sure that it's known on title searches, you put something in the land records, right, Paula, so that every title search shows up.
The title doesn't search its own.
Title doesn't search zone. That's why you put it in the land records.
If I have to say deed restriction, then tied to the deed of the property.
Mr. Semper, I didn't hear you. Say that again?
If it is that we have to do it that way, then I would have to add tied to the deed of the property.
Okay, I'm not sure that that's very clear.
I think the motion is to approve the application for a use variance for the limited use of an administrative office for a home health care agency with no more than 3 employees operating between the hours of no earlier than 9 a.m., no later than 7 p.m., Monday through Friday.
And also noting that the applicant is volunteering to restrict their deed to this use.
I have a minor problem with it.
Yes, is that your motion?
Yes, but I have before I approve, I have a minor problem with the 3 employees because I'm just scared that we have 3 employees there and a 4th person shows up to bring something and someone just, I thought you said there's only going to be.
But we already know that there's going to be auditors and other professionals in there from
All
time
right,
to time.
okay,
so-
all right, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you're saying
Full-time employees.
full-time employees, full-time employees,
How about full-time workers?
full-time
people.
workers. So therefore, a part-time worker could be full-time workers.
No.
So you can have X amount, only 3 must be full-time. Okay, I'm with that.
Oh, no. I don't, first of all, I'm not sure I would go with this in any event. I don't want to suggest that you could have 3 full-time workers and 150 part-time workers.
That's exactly, no, never gonna
So,
happen.
so it's 3 people working there at any one time.
Okay.
That's what you would
language
want.
that's been used before.
All right.
Okay, so we have a motion, you understand?
I think I have it. Is there a
Okay.
second?
Do we have a second?
I seconded it last time, I'll second it again.
Okay, Mr. Don,
Yes.
Mr. DeScala,
Yes.
Mr. Polipiano,
No.
Mr. Reeves,
No.
Mr. Semper,
Yes.
Mr. Aller.
No.
Should I do the alternates?
Excuse me?
Should I do the alternates?
Yes, because Mr. Groman isn't here.
Mr. Shapiro
Yes.
and Ms. Wareham.
I don't think I count.
Only one alternate. That's 7?
Yes. So there were,
I'm not voting today. I'm the second alternate.
Mr. Shapiro voted?
Yes.
Yes, I voted
So
yes.
it passed.
4
so
yeses?
there were 4 yeses.
4 yeses, right?
Yes.
Five.
And you
You
need
need
5.
five.
So it doesn't pass.
Doesn't pass.
And do we stop it there?
You mean, you want to go after another?
I'm not interested. To my mind, it hasn't passed, but we've spent a lot of time on this, and it's a difficult case, and I don't want to shut down anybody with a better idea, but I think that was the idea. That was Mr. Dwyer's idea, and it didn't pass. To me,
It wasn't my idea. It
well,
was
I'm
the
sorry,
applicant's
sorry,
idea.
it wasn't your idea. It was Mr. Dwyer's and Mr. Friedland's analysis. And we considered it, and it hasn't passed. And there's no other motion from the board?
Well, because I would really like to see this happen, let me ask if I can, this way, the folks who disagree, what would you like to hear or see to make it pleasing?
So, to me, the right answer in this case is a home office, where if the eventual plan of the applicant is to move into the property, maybe this has to stay vacant until they move in and they come back and ask for a variance for home office that's larger than permitted, and I would find that
Okay.
very acceptable. What I am concerned about in this case is, first of all, I do think the positive that you offered is real and is significant. But what I'm concerned about here is this idea that we allow self-imposed restrictions on use to, as an acceptable workaround for a use problem in a zone. I don't think that's a good precedent. And the advice we have is that if we impose something as narrow as this, it will not stand up and will likely be expanded. And so, while I do think I think we have
But he's not saying that.
we have an applicant who, has all the right intentions, but I think there's a problem with this application. And I think there's a solution to the problem, which is what the applicant said they wanted to do in the longer term anyway, which is move into the house. And maybe that just means the right solution, without us creating a precedent and creating a problem in the zone, is this extension has been vacant for a while. Maybe the right solution is it stays vacant for another year or two until they decide to move into the house, and then there is a very natural way to grant the use of this as an office as part of a home office.
So you are saying that if the applicant, if we add to this motion, in fact, before I do that, Mr. Adler, is there anything that we can do to make this pleasing?
I can't think of anything at the moment.
I would go further and say the applicant could move in right now into the home. They've got a son in Columbia, they're still in the district if they move in. Why aren't they moving in right now? That gives me pause. And otherwise, I agree with Mr. Polipiano. We have provisions in our ordinances for home office within a residence. Yes, they would need a variance for that, but they would have a stronger case. And I am concerned, despite the good analysis of Mr. Friedland and Mr. Dwyer, that this is unenforceable, this consideration. It's, if not novel, it's unusual. The other alternative is, it's a single-family home. They can knock down the wall and have a mother-daughter if they want. Yes, we take the risk that it becomes a frat house. So be it. I think that sort of defensiveness is not a wise way to go in the long run. It also gives confidence to the homeowners in the residential area that we draw a pretty strong line on residential uses versus business uses. And at the same time, they have a better case for a home office and a residence. And that's not what they're applying for.
Right. But they already have a home in the neighborhood, so you're saying that you should get rid of the other home and...
I'm not saying, I'm saying that if, you know, if they were, I said what I needed to say, they understand.
Chairman Reeves, would you repeat what you said a moment ago? I'm not sure I understood.
I wouldn't repeat it for Ed, why should I repeat it for you?
Because he hears better than I do.
They have a stronger case for a home office and a residence, which is what our ordinance contemplates. Yes, they would need a variance for that, but our ordinance contemplates that. So that's one thing. The other thing is this generally strongly opposed to bringing in business uses in a residential area. That is a line that I'm generally not disposed to break. The other thing is the homeowners say they're planning to move in, but they're not going to until their son graduates Columbia. Well, they can move in right now if they really want to.
They have a home. They got to sell their house.
They can
In
move
Maplewood. I
in.
mean, that's a little bit unreasonable.
It's not unreasonable. And so it gives me pause about granting a variance for when they say they're planning to move into the house. Why don't they move in right now? What was the other reason I gave?
My friend to my right said that if the owner agrees, at some point they're gonna move in or do something like that, he would consider.
That's not what I said. What I said was, if they moved in and came back with a variance application for a home office that was larger than the ordinance allows, I think they have a stronger case for that.
That's more standard.
It's a more standard case, right? And then I think Bill's point about the site being suited would be an argument in favor of allowing a larger office, right?
And Mr. Friedland, the other thing I said was that I'm very concerned about the argument, the difference between imposing versus an applicant offering things. I'm not sure, that may be a distinction without a difference. In fact, Mr. Keller maybe inadvertently suggested it's a distinction without a difference. And that's my concern, is that it would be unenforceable. And we get into this line of people coming, well, I'll make my deed restriction this, and I'll do it this way, and it becomes chaos.
Well, with all due respect, if in fact a neighbor observes or feels or believes that the deed restriction is being violated, he goes directly to Mr. Renda, and Renda investigates it, and if in fact a violation is found, they can seek injunctive relief. I mean, that's the natural progress of this situation.
My response to that was what I said before, is that my reading of Mr. Dwyer's analysis is this sort of, although he says it could be done, I don't believe it would be enforceable. I think it's very unusual. Mrs. Gruel's never seen it, Mr. Descala has never seen it, and they are professionals, and I'm not. Mr. Dwyer says it's happened. He can't cite particular cases. You haven't cited particular cases. The balance is not buying it. I think they have a stronger case for a home office and a residence. All right, is there anything else to talk about here? I don't think there is at this point. I think we should move on. Yeah. Anything else? All right.
There's a hand in the ordinance.
No, you haven't said anything before. Don't get into it. All right, thank you very much. This case is closed. All right, we'll move on. Let's take a short break and then we'll move on to Seton Hall.
Another use variance.
Okay, we're back in session, and we're now going to hear the next case on the docket. This is Seton Hall University and their case for a parking deck expansion.
Thank you.
Counsel?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Kevin Coakley. I'm with the firm of Connell Foley and here on behalf of Seton Hall University. Tonight's application, as you just indicated, is for an expansion of the existing parking deck. The expansion is located, for those familiar with the campus, between the outfield area of the baseball field and Ivy Hill Park, and it's an extension of the existing parking deck. All told, there is a net gain of 556 parking spaces, and that's comprised of about 594 spaces that are new, and then there's about 38 that are lost by virtue of the amalgamation of the deck.
Sir, we're not hearing you. Got to really speak straight into that microphone.
Okay, I'll put it a little lower. How's that? A little bit better? Okay. There'll be some spaces, approximately 38 lost by virtue of the amalgamation of the new deck into the existing deck for a net gain of 556 spaces. We're here before the Board of Adjustment this evening because one of the variances necessary is a use variance, and in particular that use variance is a D6, 70 D6 variance, which is a height variance. The allowable height is 30 feet, and the proposed height for the expansion is approximately 51 3/4 feet. So it exceeds the height limit by both more than 10 feet and more than 10%. And so under D6, it's a height variance, height use variance under the jurisdiction of the Board of Adjustment. There are two other variances and one waiver. The one variance is that the ordinance provides for 30 feet from the property line to a structure. In other words, a setback. In this case, it's a rear yard setback. And a portion of the proposed expansion is 5 feet from the property line. So that's a setback variance that's sought. There's also a variance for the height of a fence. The ordinance allows for an 8-foot fence with a 3-foot roll on top of that, whereas the proposed fence is 9.5 feet, which is to meet the existing fence in the area. And then finally, putting aside the variances, there's a design waiver for the angle of the parking stalls in the garage, and that's proposed at an angle of 70 degrees, which is contrary to the design parameters of your ordinance. So those are the basic variances that we're here about. You'll hear testimony from 5 people, at least I anticipate you'll hear from 5. They are, and probably in this order, Dennis Garbini, who's the vice president of the university, will give testimony about the overall program and reason why the university is seeking to expand its parking deck. Mr. John DiGiacinto, who's a professional engineer at Langen Engineering, will give testimony on the site engineering, site issues. Mr. Todd Helmer, Helmer, who's a professional engineer with Tim Haas, who is the designer of the parking garage. So while a professional engineer, really they are allowed to design parking decks, even though they're not architects. So you'll hear from him regarding the design, and in particularly the incorporation of how the expansion of the garage works with the existing garage, and the reasons why the garage is being constructed as it is. After that, I don't know whether it be tonight or another night, Bill Lothian of Langen will testify regarding parking and traffic-related issues. And then finally, Greg Woodruff, also of Langen, big night for Langen here. He'll testify as a planner with respect to the positive and negative criteria for the various variances. So that's a general outline of our presentation. If you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to try to address them. If not, I would call Mr. Garbini as a witness.
Do you have any questions, Mr. Coakley? No? Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, Mr. Garbini, would you be sworn, please?
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you'll give here this evening is the whole truth?
I do.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Dennis Garbini, 10 Woodland Avenue, Denville, New Jersey.
All right. Mr. Garbini, what is your office at Seton Hall University?
Vice President for Administration.
All right, and what are the general parameters of that office?
Includes facilities, human resources, and information technology.
All right. So development of this parking garage expansion is part of your duties?
Yes, it is.
And have you overseen the project?
Yes, I did.
All right. And just by way of a little background, is there a particular South Orange ordinance that governs parking on the Seton Hall campus?
Yes, there is.
All right. And does Seton Hall presently meet that ordinance? In other words, does it provide enough parking to meet the ordinance?
Yes, we do. We meet and exceed it.
All right. But nonetheless, the university has determined to expand the parking that it provides on campus. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Before I get into the reasons why, would you explain to the board what this first document or first plan that's shown here? It's called the master plan. Can you tell the board what that is?
Yes.
I'm going to mark with your consent, Mr. Chairman, that is as A1.
Okay, do we have this in our?
You do in a slightly different form, which he will tell you what the difference is.
Okay, I think as we go through this, Mr. Don suggested, and I agree, that we've had various iterations, and so let's be clear about what version and the dates and so on that things are presented, just so we don't have duplicates or obsolete versions of anything. Okay.
Yeah, so that drawing, number and date of that drawing?
This drawing is CS 100, and it was last revised on March 4, 2013.
The one we have in our package is dated 4/17/13.
Right, and there's a reason why we're showing you this drawing, and it's different from the one that you have in only one respect, which we'll get to.
Are you clear with that difference, Mr. Dwyer?
So that one predates the one we have.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
good. We're going to hear that. All right, so that's exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, go ahead.
All right, I'm just for purposes of identification, I'll mark this A1. Is that okay?
A1.
All right, Mr. Garbini, directing your attention to A1, can you tell the board what that represents?
This is the master plan as submitted to the planning board earlier this year. Currently, this was used for submission in the top left for Aquinas Hall addition, which is a fourth-story addition onto an existing residence hall, and Stafford Hall, which is in the middle of the campus. Here, if you can see where I'm pointing, which is a building built in 1880 and which is no longer serviceable for us. So we're taking that building down and replacing that with a more modern classroom building in the space, consistent with its current architecture.
All right, let me just interrupt you with a question so everyone understands. Did the planning board approve Stafford and Aquinas halls?
Last month, yes.
Last month, okay. Now, the master plan that's on the board, was that approved by the planning board?
Yes.
All right. And Mr. Chairman, there is a municipal ordinance that requires Seton Hall to periodically come before the planning board and present a master plan showing its likely campus developments. And so we're sharing that with you as well, that information. All right. All right, so you described Aquinas and Stafford, and they're about to be under construction?
Yes.
All right. Now, was there also an approval given by the planning board last year regarding the expansion to Walsh Hall? Or Brennan, excuse me, the Brennan, sorry.
Excuse me, it's the Reagan Field House.
All right.
There's a semicircle bump out on the fitness center, in the face of the fitness center. You can see that it's a glass facade that will house the, we're moving from the basement of our rec center into this glass facade, our aerobic and fitness areas, so it's quite visible from the passerbys.
All right, so is that under construction?
That is under construction.
All right, and that's about 18,000 square feet?
Yes.
Correct, more or less? All right, so...
I'm sorry, does the name of that portion of the building changed, or?
No.
He's having...
I was having a brain lock.
Oh, okay.
Which I have all the time, so please excuse me. All right, so the next thing I'd like you to address your attention to is the University Center. Would you point that out to the board?
Currently, we're in discussions with the planning board on replacing our University Center, which is, I think you're all familiar with, which was constructed in the 60s with and actually melding that with a Duffy Hall, which was constructed in the 50s for a new university center, which is the building you see running up and down in the center of campus there.
All right, and when you say in discussions, do you mean that application is before the planning board?
Yes.
All right, and there's been a hearing on that? There's going to be another hearing?
In July, yes.
Okay. So, so does that, those projects that you just described, do they take up the most recent land use applications and approvals that the university has obtained?
Yes.
Yes.
And which brings us to tonight.
Which brings us to tonight, okay? Now on the on A1, are there two potential sites of a parking deck expansion shown?
Yes. On the copy that you have before you, you'll see running along the field house and between the field house and Ivy Hill Park, there is one version of a extension of the parking garage. In addition to that, you'll see running along between the the baseball soccer field and Ivy Hill Park, another version of an extension of the parking garage.
Actually, the plan we have only has the second one.
Your plan only has the one we're seeking approval for. Yes, that is the difference. We try to always have a little hidden mystery here. So which one are you seeking approval here from?
For the one running along the baseball field.
All right. And that's shown on the plans that were presented to the board?
This plan was presented to you to show what the final two considerations we looked at before determining what we are submitting to you this evening.
All right. All right. Now, just to complete that story, why did you select the one that you selected versus the one you didn't select?
Well, in addition to it being more difficult to construct and it coming right up to the backs of the homes on Reynolds Avenue here, down at the bottom, it also runs the full length of the boundary of the campus, and I think encroaches more on the setback issue.
All right, so in any event, and the university has selected the one that is shown on this plan as the more square rather than rectangular of the two?
Correct.
All right. All right. Now,
both from a desirable perspective and easier to construct, less expensive to construct.
all right, and not as close to residential homes, is that?
Absolutely.
All right. Now, let's get back to the to where we were before I interrupted you. What is the reason for the university's decision to expand its parking deck?
Well, the parking deck as it exists now stands since 2001. Through the last decade, the university's enrollment has varied. We've struggled with a lot of competition, particularly with our sister institutions in terms of financial aid and deep discounting, et cetera. So we currently now have found our mark. This past fall, we put together, for the last 2 years, we put together a very successful professional enrollment services team. Their strategies are working. We had a very successful enrollment class that came in last fall. And in fact, we not only met and exceeded our numbers, but also exceeded our quality. So we have every expectation that we'll be able to achieve the target goal for our incoming freshman class, and therefore stabilize our enrollment on the undergraduate level, but also continue to maintain our quality. That all being said, over the course of the last decade, there's also been a number of challenges, and I think in working with the village, we've dealt with some of the parking issues that our students might have presented everywhere from Riggs to Fairview to Ward, South Center Street, and on South Orange Avenue. While dealing with those issues, basically there have left very little options for parking off our campus. So now as our enrollment is stabilizing and will even out, we need to make sure that our students don't present themselves back out on the street. And by doing that, we feel this is time to seek to expand the parking garage.
All right. And have you done any affirmative reviews of the parking situation on campus?
Yes, we have, and I believe that will be presented and by one of the experts.
All right, and you've been advised that the parking capacity of campus is exceeded from time to time, more or less?
I've been advised by our experts, but even before that, I've been advised by our students.
And what does that mean? That they can't find spots to park?
That there's certain times of the week that it's difficult to park. Of course, we all know that everyone wants to park as close as possible to the building that they want to go to. But all that being said, it is true that there are times of the week that it's difficult for students to find parking, and it may have caused them to be late.
All right. And are you generally familiar with the number of parking registrations that the university issues?
I am.
All right. What is that number generally?
I don't have that.
Yeah.
I think there's someone else speaking to that.
All right, we'll catch up with that with Mr. Lothian on that particular issue. All right. And in part of your investigation before commissioning this project, were you advised that students were sometimes parking in spots that might not be legal spots on campus?
There were times that students were blocking fire lanes. And our security was vigilant on that, but we recognize that it's a difficult situation, and it's our intention to try and move as quickly as possible with hopefully your cooperation to resolve that.
All right, and when you talked about those various streets in South Orange, were you essentially telling the board that students were parking on those streets?
Yes, they were in the past. Over the course of the last decade, many of the streets were limited to 1 hour parking or no parking. And through those periods of times, we frequently, on a daily basis, we receive phone calls where students might have been blocking a driveway or getting too close to a driveway. There'd be situations with maybe litter. Whatever it was, they were situations that we were sympathetic to our neighbors and wanted to pull the problems, those issues back on campus with us to deal with.
All right, I have no further questions, Mr. Garabini.
We have questions from Mr. Garabini?
I just have one. Do you, as a result of building the new expansions or new residence halls, do you see a change in the relationship to residents, students, and commuter students?
The resident hall where the addition is taking place is a freshman resident building. And in fact, freshmen are not permitted to have cars. So it actually, basically that addition of 162 beds will increase the number of residential students on campus. Shouldn't impact the number of commuters at all.
So the ratio will change, but to the benefit, there'll be a greater number of residential.
Yes.
Mr. Don, you look like you're about. No. Let me ask Mr. Garabini. I appreciate Seton Hall University's concern for the town, but in pulling cars off of the local streets. But do you have another reason that I see no reason to be embarrassed about it? If this will make the university more attractive to students, that they can park right on campus or don't have to drive around as much? Are there other reasons besides?
Well, obviously, my point was not to say simply we are doing this to avoid students finding their ways back out on the local streets. Obviously, as I did indicate, we don't want the students hunting for parking spaces, being frustrated by that experience, blocking fire lanes, getting their cars towed or ticketed, being late for class. We want obviously the whole experience to be a positive experience. And by when I speak about these cars, remember these cars are not just for people who might be driving to campus from Fairlawn, but they may also be students who live as far as 2 blocks away and will choose to drive a car onto campus. But all that being said, it's our interest to make sure we provide a good experience for individuals as they're looking to park on campus and make it to the class. We're also looking to provide a discrete area for visitor parking so that we can better control that. So I didn't mean to suggest that this was sheerly to keep people from parking on the streets in South Orange.
Mr. Adler.
Mr. Garbini, what's the cost, is there a cost to a parking permit for a semester? And if so, what is it?
John, what's the cost for a parking permit?
There's a range depending on the type of permit. We can't.
For students,
200
per semester?
a year.
Thank you.
Mr. Parlapiano?
Does the university have any programs to encourage students to take mass transit?
Yes, we did, and we had, in particular, every year we attempt to, we had a grant, I think it's expired in the current year, but with New Jersey Transit, as you know, we have the shuttle bus to pick them up and make that easier. There's efforts for carpooling, etc. So yes, there are efforts to keep not one man, one car.
Right.
Mr. Shapiro?
What proportion of the total student body have cars on campus versus those that don't?
Well, on the undergraduate population, I would say approximately half have the ability to bring a car on campus. In terms of the resident students, the only seniors are permitted to have a car on campus, and by the time I think we will have 2,200 beds before this addition, and I would say by the time individuals reach their senior year where they're permitted to have a car on campus, the percentage of people who still live on campus has dropped. So it's probably less than 150 seniors. Now, that being said, individuals who are maybe sophomores and juniors, who are student teachers or are nurses and doing their clinical, for that period of time that they're performing those functions, are permitted to bring a car on campus.
So as I understand it, half the student body have cars. What percentage of the student body are commuters versus residential?
About half.
About half.
Yeah, about half of the students are commuters, and of the half that are residential students, about 150 of them might have cars on campus.
So the overwhelming number of cars would be commuters.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Simper?
You said that the university has reached a sort of a steady state with the population right now?
No, I wouldn't say that. This past year, we admitted, and as I indicated, we had some fluctuations in our enrollment. This past year, we admitted in excess of 1,400 freshmen, whereas the fall before that, 970, and the fall before that, 1,300. And the fall before that, 1,150. Our ultimate goal is to achieve approximately 1,250. And we now have the team in place that we feel that we can be able to control that and bring that enrollment in and have that stabilize at that number as it had been years before.
Of that 1,400 that came in this year, next year, they would be entitled to bring a vehicle.
Of the 1,400?
Yeah.
None. Of the 1,400 freshmen, the only ones who might be are students who are, well, commuters, because they would be in the 1,400, and any of the students who were living on campus who might be student teachers or nurses who are in clinical.
Mr. Shapiro.
Are students who live off campus but in town considered commuters or residential?
They're commuters.
I see. What percentage of the commuters live in the immediate vicinity versus those who commute long distance?
We can only estimate that because students are careful about giving that information. Their parents they want to continue to maintain for instance, the grades and billing go to the home address. So when we examine our students, our files, it tends to show up that where their parents' address. So I would, on a percentage basis, of the commuters, I would say it's no more than 15 to 20% live within a mile of campus. I'm guesstimating that.
Mr. Keller?
Yeah, just one question. What was the process that the university went through on determining how many parking spaces you were going to add with this proposal?
Well, basically, we looked at the space available within within that strip of land there, without, of course, pushing the envelope too far, and went from there.
So it was more limited by the physical features of the area as opposed to some sort of a projection as to what the anticipated increased demand would be.
Well, I think you'll hear further testimony concerning the level of utilization now, the need to have some breathing room in a parking deck, so you don't want to have a parking deck that has no room for people to find a spot in, and all of those factors went into this, and I think there's further testimony about that.
Okay, thank you.
That's all. Ms. Warren, were you going to ask a question? Any other questions for Mr. Garbini? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, we have to ask if there are members of the public that wish to ask Mr. Garbini a question. Okay.
All right. The next witness is Mr. John DiGiacento, who is the site engineer. Do you want to swear him, Mr. John?
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony that you will give is the whole truth?
I do.
Please state your name and address for the record.
John DiGiacento with Langen Engineering, 619 River Drive, Elmwood Park.
All right, and what is your profession?
Civil engineer.
And how long have you been licensed as a civil engineer or as an engineer?
Going on 14 years now.
All right. And have you prepared the plans that are submitted this evening?
Yes, I have.
All right. Have you appeared and given testimony before land use boards like this board in the past?
Yes, I have.
All right. Approximately how many occasions? Give or take.
50.
50 times. All right. And you're fully familiar with this application?
Yes, I am.
All right. I'd like to offer him as an expert in the field of civil engineering.
Okay, do we have any questions for Mr. DiGiacento?
All right, could you give the board an overview of the project from a
We
civil...
recognize you as an expert.
All right.
I have to say that.
All right, sorry, jumped the gun. All right, you want to give the board an overview of the application, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mr. Garbini gave you a good beginning with the location of the addition that we're looking at, or expansion, I should call it in this case.
Just keep your voice up.
Yep.
Keep your voice up. Yep.
As you mentioned, we're going to be against the field and the park and expanding off of the existing deck to the southwest. This second addition is actually not proposed anymore. And I think Mr. Coakley gave you a lot of the beginning numbers with the expansion's 596 spaces. There's a net increase of 556 with some changes that I'll present as I go through some other plans. Mark this as an exhibit, I guess.
All right, so we're going to mark this A2. Could you identify it, please?
Yeah, this is the proposed circulation plan, CP 102, and it's dated April 17th, 2013, and that was submitted to the board, so you should have that.
All right, so what you're going to describe is how vehicles come and go from the garage?
Yeah, this plan basically represents the traffic circulation as well as the parking locations on the property. The main entrance, also known as Farinella Gate, off of South Orange Avenue at the signalized intersection, and the other entrance off of Ward Place. And as you know, Seton Drive runs completely through the property. There's some scattered parking lots predominantly by the residential buildings along Seton Drive. There is the McNulty Gate entrance off of South Orange Avenue, which is no longer used except for emergency access. And that's what this separately hatched area is. This is predominantly emergency access and some restricted vehicle access. And then we have the field house, which basically provides the extension of Madison Road around the field house. Currently, on both what I'll call the south and north side of the building is two-way traffic. Along this eastern portion of the property, currently there is one-way traffic. Right now, it travels in a counterclockwise direction. So as you come in off the intersection with Madison and Seton Drive, you can do the full loop. Prior to the Fieldhouse expansion, it was actually, no, as part of the Fieldhouse expansion, it was made counterclockwise. I apologize. Originally, it was clockwise. So originally, you could continue through. Now it goes the opposite way. As part of this application, we're changing that to two-way completely around the facility building, or Fieldhouse building, excuse me. As part of that, there's going to be some changes in the parking along the residential properties. We're actually going to be losing 18 spaces. Currently, on both sides of the driveway is angled parking. We're removing the angled parking that faces towards the residential and turning that into parallel parking.
All right, so let me just see if I can clarify. If someone is coming in from South Orange Avenue towards the garage, just show the board how they would proceed to get into the garage.
Generally, right now.
No, in the future.
Okay.
What will be the plan?
The plan is that most of the access into the garage would come off of this intersection here, Seton Drive, and the driveway right by the parking deck. There will be some ability to go around the field house to get in, but the likelihood of people using that to get in obviously doesn't make much sense because it's a longer path. And then there's the entrance into the deck and the exit out of the deck. The idea is that this two-way circulation will help relieve some of the congestion that occurs during certain peak hours, which the traffic engineer is going to provide you a little more detail on. As daytime students and evening students are swapping parking spaces, you know, coming and going, they'll have the option of using this current exit location, which is the only exit available at this point right now, out onto Seton Drive, where they can make the left or the right to South Orange Avenue or Ward. They'll now have the ability to go around the field house In all likelihood, most of these, and I'm sure all of the people that go around the field house will be making the right on Seton Drive and heading out to South Orange Avenue.
So do you feel that that would be improved circulation over what exists now?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, and what will be the result of that? Will traffic move better on campus?
Yeah, I'm certain that traffic in and out of the parking deck and through campus back onto South Orange Avenue and Ward Place is going to flow a lot better than it would if that option was not available with the expansion of the deck.
Okay. All right. Now, what are the other principal civil engineering aspects of the project?
For that, I'm going to move on to, I guess, what will now be Exhibit A3. That is our site plan, drawing number CS101. Last revised on April 17th.
CS 101, last revised on April 17th.
Yes. That should be a separate drawing from the full pack as part of our secondary submission.
I have a CS 101 that is dated February 27th.
Yes. Both drawings, the original submission in the full set, as well as the supplemental submission would have that date. The second separate supplemental submission has the 417 in the revision block.
Okay.
Okay. Obviously, in this area, for this drawing, we've zoomed in to this portion of the site. We have the expansion as well as the existing deck. On the top right side, you can see a portion of Seton Drive along the existing deck. As was mentioned, this is a proposed 5-story, 594 parking space expansion. The result, with some modifications to the existing deck, is 556 parking spaces, increase total. The expansion is approximately 34,500 square feet. The existing deck is about 82,000 square feet, so we're just shy of 117,000 with the overall proposed parking deck. In the existing conditions, this is the athletic field above the parking deck. You have Ivy Hill Park below, and currently right now there are tennis courts where the proposed expansion is going to be located.
Right, so now the 34,000 you described, is that the gross square footage of the expansion on a ground level? Is that
Yes, that is the footprint area of the expansion.
All right. And Mr. Helmer is going to testify about the design itself of the garage?
Yes, he will.
Okay.
As Mr. Coakley mentioned, one of the variances that we are requesting is setback. Along the southeast property line, on the bottom of your page, you can see we have a minimum, our minimum request is for 5-foot setback. That occurs on about 130 feet of the overall length, which is about 350 feet. And as you can see, as you head towards the northeast, we start to pull away from the property line to a maximum of 20.6 feet. And then on the southwest property line, we are requesting, as part of the same variance, that portion of the building is 18.2 feet down in the lower corner and about 26.5 feet as you move up the page. As was mentioned, the required setback in this zone, for the university zone, is 30 feet. The existing deck varies in this portion over here from about 36 feet to about 40 feet. The other variance we're requesting is height. This is a 5-story parking deck with a height of 51 feet. The existing deck, as noted on the zoning table, is 63.5 feet. And again, the allowable height in this zone is 30 feet, which brings us to the D variance.
Now, where is the fence located? And
Yeah.
that you were going to mention that.
Next item is the fence. We're relocating the fence that currently exists along the tennis courts, basically along our existing property line. The existing fence that's there now is 9.5 feet, and the idea is we're going to relocate that and replace what we need to, but use that same height. So that'll continue to match the fencing that's on the other side of the property that's not going to be moved. The ordinance allows for a 8-foot fence with a 3-foot roll, so essentially it's an 11-foot fence. You know, the roll's that curved piece sort of kind of blocks highway walkways and things like that. I think that covers the
So you
variances
covered
on
the
my part.
variances, you covered the circulation. What about water quality? Want to cover that?
We'll go to my last exhibit, which is A4. That is the grading and drainage plan, drawing CG 101. Again, this drawing was revised on April 17th.
CG 101, April 17th.
Yeah, this was part of the supplemental submission as well. So currently, the tennis courts, there's the tennis courts, and then there's a sort of service area between the tennis courts and the existing deck. A significant portion of the tennis courts sheet flows across the courts, and then a portion of this actually sheet flows and is collected into an existing drainage system along the property line, and it's conveyed down towards the field house into the existing storm sewer system. In the proposed conditions, what we succeeded in doing is essentially mimicking the scenario where about 2/3 of the parking deck is collected, it's piped into a scour hole, and then continues to sheet flow, and 1/3 of the deck is collected via pipes and ties back into this existing system where it used to sheet flow. The portion that ties into the existing system actually runs through a water quality treatment device, and that portion of the runoff is actually a reduction from the existing conditions. On the portion that originally sheet flowed across, now is collected and then into the scour hole before it sheet flows. We do have a very slight increase, and I believe Amlin agreed that it's a very de minimis increase in the peak runoff. I also did some quick checks before I left the office to come here to find out how things were beyond the peak flow, looking at the volume of runoff. We look at various storm events required by the regulations of 210 and 100 year. The increase was 13, 18, and 24 cubic feet respectively for the 210 and 100 year storm, which I think is very de minimis. In addition, this scour hole that's recreating the sheet flow concept actually will store certain amounts of water in the stone that will percolate back into the ground. That scour hole will roughly hold and percolate 75 to 100 cubic feet, which is greater than the increase in runoff that's occurring based on the reconfiguration. In terms of the water quality that Kevin mentioned, again, 1/3 of the deck ties into an existing system. We have had some discussions with Amlin about the other portions of the deck, and I think Langen has narrowed down with the applicant we're going to be installing filters in the 4 drains on the roof deck that will filter the runoff off the deck, remove a lot of the sediment, and particularly petroleum-type products. We're going to be submitting that to Omlin in the very near future.
Omlin being the board's engineer.
The board's reviewing engineer, Omlin, yes.
All right, anything more to testify about before going through the letters?
No, I think that's the bulk of the basics.
So, University received 2 letters, one from Omlin Engineering, one from Hired Rule, concerning particular comments, and this will go through some of the comments, and succeeding witnesses will finish them up.
Good.
All right, directing your attention to the letter from Omlin Engineering Associates dated May 10, 2013. Do you have that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And starting on page 2, where it says parking deck expansion engineering plans, paragraph 1, would you address that? That has to do with the circulation and the dwellings on Reynolds Drive.
Yeah, I went through the circulation on the circulation plan of the change from 1-way to 2-way. It's our opinion that there'll be limited impacts to the residents there. One of the benefits of changing this to 2-way is we will no longer have the angled parking that faces those properties, in which at certain times at night, obviously, headlights could be shining into their backyards. Now with the parallel parking, they're going to get a lot less headlights turning in there. The 2 sides that I mentioned were 2-way originally. The university has mentioned that often people will come out of the deck or be circulating through the campus and get to the end of this and realize they can't continue because it's 1-way. So you're getting a lot of traffic turning around here. That's going to eliminate a lot of that scenario. And I think in general the circulation is going to flow better, and I don't expect that the residents are going to see much increase in noticing this happening.
All right. Paragraph 4 on page 2 has to do with the construction schedule for the project.
Yes.
When is it planned that the project will start?
Obviously dependent on the board's approval, but the intent is to start this summer.
All right. And how long will it take to construct the garage?
The schedule is about 9 months with completion in the spring of 2014.
Can you say that again? I didn't hear it.
Starting this summer, 9 months construction, finishing in spring of 2014.
Thank you.
Okay. Next one is paragraph 5. It talks about a soil erosion and sediment control plan. Is that agreeable to you?
Yes, we'll update and revise the plan as required
All right.
or requested.
Paragraph 7 talks about
This gets into
sidewalk
some
connections.
stormwater issues.
Is that paragraph acceptable?
Yeah, that's acceptable.
Mr. Coakley, did you skip paragraph 2?
They'll be addressed by others.
Okay.
Yes. Anything that I skip will be addressed by another witness. All right, so you'll do that stormwater as described in paragraph 7?
Yeah, we're going to coordinate with Omlin. We've actually looked at some of this, and I think it's more of a coordination with Omlin on what we want to propose. At this time, we don't want to remove the drain and install a garden feature. The grades in this area don't work well without a drain because of the way locations of doors and the grades inside and out of the building. We do need this drain that's mentioned in here, but we're going to work with Omlin to revise or finalize to their satisfaction.
All right, paragraph 9 has to do with posting bonds. Is that agreeable?
Yep, we agree to that.
Paragraph 10, providing as-built for the stormwater. Is that agreeable?
That will be done.
Cleaning and inspection of the stormwater management system. Is that agreeable?
Yes.
That would be paragraph 11. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
Seton Hall actually currently has a contract. This does mention the existing storm sewer system. There's an existing system That's part of the field, athletic field, as well as behind the parking deck. Currently, National Water Main inspects at a minimum once a year and after major storm events, and that's going to continue.
All right, paragraph 13 deals with stormwater. You've already addressed that, is that correct?
Yes, those are the filters I mentioned on the roof deck.
Okay. Paragraph 14 also deals with stormwater, is that correct? Is there anything to add to that?
No, it's just requesting some clarifications, which we'll provide for Omland to address this comment.
15 is stormwater, and 16 and 17.
Yep,
Are they all agreeable?
they're all agreeable, yes.
Okay.
Okay, before we keep going here, I want to understand, you're agreeing to do these things, agreeing to a lot of things, which I'm glad you're addressing them, but when are you going to, are they going to be coming up in a revised plans?
Well, normally these types of things, a project like this, that, after it's approved, the engineer submits revised plans to the board.
So be subject to the engineer's approval?
Yes, subject to the engineer's approval.
Is that generally the way these things work, Mr. Keller?
Depending on the board's preference, I mean, some of these are very technical in nature. I'm sorry. It's to the board's pleasure as to what they're comfortable with. A number of these on the stormwater are technical in nature and don't go to the material basis for the approval, but it's up to the board as to what they're comfortable with.
Okay, look, I think we should be forthright here. This is a relatively unusual application for this board, so we're going to be looking for a certain amount of guidance from the experts as to what's customary, and we value your opinion in this. And we approve things on condition all the time. It's just I'm kind of unfamiliar with some of this. I know Mr. Don can also probably give us some guidance on this. But I just wanted to be sure that we're not just saying, check, 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 and we never see that it's actually done.
I think that these are the kind of things that would be, we would basically address these as conditions of approval, subject to the engineer approving them, because I don't think we wanted to get into the minutia of pipe size and inverts and pitch. And I know I don't.
Okay.
And it's our intent to submit a point-by-point response letter with updated plans to the board and the professionals for their review.
Okay.
And the other way to do it is to get that approval, get a confirmation from our engineer that he's satisfied with the responses, and then vote, as opposed to voting condition bill 2.
Yeah,
Okay.
depending on the number of things that they're going to be sending to our professionals, we may end up wanting to do that. They may have an expectation that we'll do that.
I mean, we have this. We're on our second round of plans at present, so we've narrowed this down quite a bit at this point. For a project of this size, generally, it's conditioned on the stipulations of the applicant said at the hearing, and then the review by the engineer of the plans. Otherwise, things never move forward,
Right.
really. I mean,
And our responses will be specific point by point that they have addressed them, in what fashion they've addressed them, and whether it's to our satisfaction or we want something more. So,
And that often takes place after a approval has been given.
right. And even after the approval has been given, we do what we call resolution compliance, that they have addressed all of the points in whatever memos are referenced, plus whatever conditions that the board may impose upon them. Our letters sometimes can, as Mr. Dwyer can attest, in West Orange, where we've been the engineer for 7 years, sometimes the review letters get a little lengthy, but we want to be thorough, and we want the board to be aware of what our feedback is on each of those points.
Okay.
All right, now going to the higher GRU letter, as I read it, you've already addressed number 6, which is the setback against Ivy Hill Park.
Yes.
Could you give us the date of that letter?
That was dated May 16th, 2013. You know, it just occurs to me, I should have said this at the beginning, that just for purpose of continuity on the record, this matter was called on May 7th and it was continued from that date. I think that should be on the record. Should have said that at the beginning. All right, so you've addressed, and the others are for other witnesses. So you've addressed number 6 previously?
Yes. Yep.
Dealing with setback, you've addressed 7, dealing with the fence?
Correct.
Well, you know, I just, I don't want to, you've certainly told us where the fence is going to be and told us that there's an encroachment to the setback. I'm assuming the planner is going to talk about why that is needed and why you believe it's okay.
Yes.
Right, so you haven't, I mean, the question
Yeah.
raised there is really the latter question, not the where is it
Yeah,
question.
these really just to set the stage to the. All right, so up to number 9, it brings up the question of screening. You see that?
Yes.
All right, could you address that?
The one discussion that the universities had, I'll go back to the site plan, CS 101, Exhibit A3. The university intends to extend the Leland cypresses that are currently on this portion of the campus to help soften the view of the garage from the, I guess, the Ivy Hill tennis courts, it's called.
Then go on to 16, 17, and 18, the questions regarding the miscellaneous matters concerning the project.
Yeah, 16 is discussing the area behind the existing deck. Currently, this is about where the property line, or the tennis court limit is. So there's this portion between those two areas, which is used for storage and maintenance area. The university is developing plans to relocate what is stored here as part of their consolidation of maintenance areas throughout the campus.
All right, what about 17?
Yeah, I think I covered this when I talked about the circulation behind the existing field house that's being turned from one-way to two-way, and they'll have a reduction of about 18 parking spaces.
And then the last one is 18.
The last portion is the areas surrounding the deck, basically between the property line and the deck, that are identified as being grass and/or mulch, and how they're going to be maintained. The university is going to have access both through the garage, there's 2 doorways over here, and they'll actually have access along this portion along the Ivy Hill Park, so they'll be able to maintain, mow grass, spray weeds, pull weeds, that kind of stuff. That area is accessible to their maintenance staff.
All right, I don't think I have any more questions for this witness. Turn them over to the board.
We have questions?
Yeah, I'd like to hear a little bit more about stormwater. So your testimony is that the current stormwater that's coming off the tennis courts, which are impervious, runs where?
It sheet flows across the tennis courts and basically into Ivy Hill Park.
Into the
Ivy Hill Park.
Right,
off,
so
off-site.
it just runs wherever the elevation takes it and soaks into the ground.
Correct.
When you put up the deck, will you be increasing the amount of impervious in that area or decreasing it?
We are actually decreasing the amount of impervious surface by approximately 4,000 square feet, which is roughly a little shy of a tenth of an acre.
Yeah, yeah. And your testimony is that 1/3 of the new impervious will be directed to a stormwater treatment.
Correct. In both the existing conditions, the way the contours and the runoff comes off the site, approximately 2/3 sheet flows off the site. The other third comes down and gets collected by inlets along this property line.
Right.
And which is part of an existing, feeds into an existing treatment device.
Right. So that's existing.
Right, so in the proposed condition, this third of the deck, we're gonna collect this same runoff. It's slightly less runoff coming off of this portion than in the existing condition, and we're gonna pipe it into that catch basin
So
where it
you
used to flow.
preserve that, which is
Yes.
beneficial.
Correct.
And the other 2/3,
The other 2/3, again, are piped. They come down into a scour hole, which reduces the erosion potential as the water exits out. And we've set up this scour hole so it sort of acts as almost, I don't want to say technically a swale, but it slows the water down and it's going to let it sheet flow again off the property, very similar to what it was doing before. There is some grade and wall here that forced a lot of this water into this confined area as it sheet flowed off the site, and our proposed system is over here, so it's essentially mimicking it. And what we're doing on the roof, inside the drain, we've modified the drains from our original design to incorporate a filter that will pass the water quality storm, filter out sediment as well as petroleum products, which obviously weren't here under the tennis court conditions.
did you consider a plan to retain the water on the site rather than having it run into Ivy Hill?
We did discuss that, didn't feel it was necessary because we were basically reducing the impervious as well as essentially matching the existing flow conditions in terms of both runoff rate and volume.
Right, so your testimony would be that you're overall reducing impervious somewhat, and you're filtering the water to the extent that there now are petroleum products or sediment in it because it's a parking garage rather than tennis court, and
Correct.
so you are at least doing no new harm.
Correct.
You're
We are-
preserving the existing conditions.
The whole design is basically so that the parking deck will have no impact on stormwater and the adjacent property, as well as the storm sewer systems.
I'm confused here. The Gruel analysis says that the lot coverage goes from 24% to 27%. So you're saying that the lot coverage is decreasing. I understand you're building it over the
It's
tennis
different.
courts, right?
Correct. The tennis courts are not part of the lot coverage. The analysis for coverage is in the university zone is building coverage, not impervious coverage. So we are increasing building coverage, but we're replacing the existing tennis courts, which are larger than the parking garage expansion.
But the tennis courts today are impervious.
They are impervious, yes. They're paved asphalt painted surface.
Do we have other questions?
Yeah, I probably have a few. Some have been asked by Mr. Parlapiano, but I can hit on a couple. Unless somebody, I'd be more than happy to hear other people ask my questions and let it go. Mr. Don, I'm sure, has plenty of questions. No?
Not yet.
Okay.
Ms. Gruel, do you have any questions?
Not at this time.
Mr. Keller, do you have any questions?
I just have two. I think. And I know Mr. Helmer will talk about the deck, but the existing underground pipe detention system, will those manholes that are underneath the deck still be accessible for the appropriate vac truck or whatever to get access?
For cleaning inspection, yes.
Okay.
Well, two of the manholes will be under the deck. There's other manholes in the system that are outside, but I believe National Water Main's already been just consulted about the proposed expansion so that they understand what's happening.
I just want to make sure that the university can still maintain the deck, maintain the system so that it will function in the manner in which it was intended.
No, that was high on the priority list.
Okay. The other, and I know we've had my office has had discussions with your office about the scour hole. And looking at it, have you looked at the potential impact into Ivy Hill Park? I understand you're trying to mimic the sheet flow that occurs, but there is still some concentration of flow in that area, and looking at an aerial, it puts that right behind the dugout and bleachers on the third base side. So
Yes, I mean, we're essentially putting the water back into the same places. We do understand there is some drainage in the park. I don't know the exact details of that drainage, but the intent was to put the water into the same places and not obviously create an adverse impact. And that's why we did our best to match the flows. And as I said, we have a very de minimis increase in the peak flow rate as well as the total volume.
something that we, I think, still need to think about a little bit and understand better what impact that may have. I certainly don't want Essex County to look to the village and say, you allowed something that adversely impacted our park.
Do you have an alternative suggestion?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay, we'll think of one.
And we, we'll obviously work with your office, and we're also going to be making an application to the Essex County Board for their review as well. So I think between the three of us, if there's an issue to address, we can resolve it.
Okay. Have you contacted them with relation to this application? They're within the 200
We have made
foot.
this. Yes, we've submitted the application already.
To both the city of Newark and the county, in Essex County.
Just Essex County. Newark's been Newark residents within 200 feet have been notified.
But not the city itself?
The city itself has not.
Because it's a county park, is that
Yes.
the reason? Okay.
The city of Newark was notified of this application.
They were?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Dunn?
Yeah, just a couple questions to pick up on the drainage issue. So the roof of this is obviously exposed to the sky. I'm assuming that the three sides that are not connected to the existing parking structure are open. It qualifies as an open parking structure?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm assuming that are there drains on the other floors?
There are drains on the other floors, yes.
So obviously it's not the same quantity of water, but where's that water going?
That water connects into the same two systems that I described.
So
those areas do not receive
I know it's not a significant
rain.
amount. Right.
I mean, they'll obviously get a little bit, but the openings are not very big on the sides of the garage.
Well, they
Couple-
better be big enough for it to qualify as an open
Well,
parking
yes,
structure.
they're big enough to qualify as the open parking structure, but we're not talking about 8-foot clear walls at this point. Several, 2-3 feet.
It better be more than
Mr.
2
Helmer
or
can
3
get-
feet, or else it's not an open parking structure.
I don't design decks,
Okay.
but Mr. Helmer will be able to fill you in on all that.
Well, I guess my point is, if we've got 30-some thousand square feet on the top floor, how much additional water are we picking up on the other 4 floors? And is that volume resulting in a bigger volume than the tennis courts have now? I guess that's, in an inarticulate way, that's what I'm asking.
Based
And I
on
don't know
my-
if anybody's calculated that,
Based
but I
on my
don't,
experience, we've actually aren't required to look at anything but the roof
from a drainage point of view.
from the drainage point of view and the stormwater runoff point of view. It's the area of the footprint.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Darn, I thought I had a good question.
But something, you raised a good point in the fact that we need to consider in dealing with the water quality that vehicles on floors below the roof could be dragging in snow or not so much rain, because to get to this portion of the deck, you're circulating through the existing deck, but they could have snow on them that melts, runs across the parking deck floor, cars run through it, and there could be materials that come off the vehicles on levels besides the upper deck.
Not to mention a blown radiator or something like that.
Yes, true.
And then the one last question, I just want to confirm that the only way for cars to get into this expansion is through the existing deck. It
That is
doesn't have
correct.
its own entrances.
No, it does not.
I don't have any other questions.
Is it a naive question to ask if you're connecting a third of it to an existing stormwater management system, why couldn't you connect the entire deck to that same system? Does that gravity not work that way? Is that impossible? Does it overload the system? Too expensive?
I think that's the case.
What?
I think that's probably the case. The quantity of water would probably overload what the system was designed for.
Well, let me ask the engineer, yes.
I thought I gave you a good answer.
Yeah, you thought you were going to get away with it, not having to answer the question.
No, he's correct actually in stating that if we took all of the drainage into this existing system, it's likely that the filter device, which is a storm scepter system that was installed as part of the athletic field project, it's likely that that would be overloaded and not be able to handle the same, the addition of all that runoff. Plus, one of the things we try to do in our engineering is not change the drainage area patterns. By putting all this water into this system, we could be creating issues with that system, that other connections into that system could potentially back up because too much flow would be going into that system.
Thank you. Other questions?
I have a couple still. One is there going to be somebody that's going to talk more about traffic circulation, or are you the...
Yes. No, you'll get some information from the architect as well as the traffic
both
engineer.
internal to the garage and that exit entrance area that you started to talk about earlier?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll
both of them are going to have more information. We're all going to be here if you have questions that one of us needs to answer.
Okay. I guess I might as well just say, this isn't really a question, but it's too bad that you guys didn't figure out a way to retain the runoff and use it for, watering the lawn or something. That's, green concept is always better, from my perspective anyway. Is that, and maybe this isn't a question for you, the planning board application that's pending, is this tied to that application in any way? Would you consider it to be something the planning board would?
No. I mean, the university's parking ordinance relates to the total number of students and faculty on campus, which is reported by the university on an annual basis. And it's basically a percentage of that is the required number of spaces. And the university presently has in excess of that minimum number of spaces. So
there's no indication that the planning board might deny your application, your other pending application, based on the results of this one?
No.
Okay.
No.
And they are aware that, obviously from approving the master plan, that this application is going before this board as opposed to them.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Other questions? Do members of the public have any questions? Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Adler, did you have a question? I'm sorry.
Just on this runoff, so as I understand it, you're not required to look at any surface other than the roof in determining the runoff. But although there may in fact be more runoff from the other floors due to the openings in the walls. Is that fair?
Yes.
And with a runoff into an existing filter, is it possible, and you said that might be overwhelmed, is it possible to expand that filter?
My understanding on the unit that they're using, which is a specific product called Storm Scepter, the only way to increase the capacity of that system is to replace that system. It's not something that can be added on to. There are other devices that can expand if they're set up for expansion before they're installed, but my understanding of this system is it can't be. And in this case, the runoff from the parking deck is actually less than the runoff from the tennis courts.
I understand that, but the issue was
Taking all of it.
pollutants.
Right.
That's what was addressed, that's what I was addressing. So there may be in fact more pollutants, if I understand it, from the, whatever rain comes in through the openings in the walls, washes down the hydraulic fluid, transmission fluid, oil that's dripping from the cars, and that's going to go into this system that
Correct.
could be made bigger, but not
No,
simply.
this one specifically can't be made bigger, but these specific units are based on flow rates, and they capture both the sediment as well as the petroleum products internally in various baffle systems and things like that. So despite there will be a slight increase in the pollutant level, changing from a tennis court to a parking deck, obviously, the flow rate's reducing, so the unit will actually have less water running through it, but the capability of still collecting all of those contaminants. And that's a unit that the university has inspected as well as cleaned out on a fairly regular basis. So if they start noticing an increase in, say, sediment loading, they can just adjust the clean out schedule and get that taken care of sooner instead of potentially overloading.
And on the parking circulation that you showed, the loop around the field house, wouldn't you say that if traffic, and it's more traffic, I assume, than the existing condition, coming out of the parking deck, is now going in two directions to the, I guess you'd call it the east or the south, I can't tell, it would be southeast. That would be coming in two directions down the two sides of the U that we're looking at. Those headlights would be...
Well, currently, both those sides, and I assume you're speaking on the two sides of the structure, here and here?
Yes.
Those are currently both two-way.
Okay.
The only change is from one-way to two-way along this portion of the property, in which I indicated we're also removing 18 of the parking spaces.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Basically, it was one way in order to accommodate those additional parking spaces.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the only way they all fit.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to call the next witness is Todd Helmer.
Loss of 18 spaces from that longer parking?
Yeah, but then we can have some parallel. Do you want to know what the figure is?
Yeah, if we could.
Before we move further, there's going to be a loss of 18 spaces along that back side of the field house, but then there's going to be parallel parking. What's the net loss or gain?
The net loss back there is 18. I have the numbers. Currently, and it's on the plan, we have it on the site plan, there are, I believe it's 49 existing spaces and 31 proposed.
Thank you. Okay.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you give here this evening is the whole truth?
I do.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Todd Helmer, 550 Township Line Road, Blue Bell, Pennsylvania.
All right, Mr. Helmer, what is your profession?
I'm a structural engineer and principal with Timothy Haas and Associates and parking planner and designer.
And what is your educational background?
Educational background is an engineering degree from Georgia Tech.
All right, and are you licensed as an engineer in any jurisdiction?
Yes, I am. Licensed engineer in New Jersey.
All right, and What is your experience in the design of parking garages?
My experience spans over the past 18 years. I've been employed with Timothy Haas and Associates in designing parking structures for that span of time.
Right, and could you give a little bit of elaboration about that? Approximately how many garages have you been involved in as a design professional?
I would say that I've designed well over 150 parking structures. Our firm spans up and down the Northeast corridor down to Miami. So I've designed parking structures in the Northeast as well as South Florida.
And did your firm design the existing parking structure that the university has?
We did. I actually had worked and was the project manager on the expansion of the existing parking structure, vertical expansion.
All right. And have you been involved in other New Jersey parking garages?
Many.
All right. Could you just give a little bit of examples of that?
Okay. Some of the examples. UMDMJ worked on a parking structure that was mixed use with a dormitory on top. Worked at New Jersey Transit, Hamilton Station, New Jersey Transit, Ramsey, Novartis Pharmaceuticals, to name a few.
Are you working on a parking structure in South Orange at the present time?
Yes, I am.
All right,
It's the development at 3rd and Valley, Jonathan Rose and Company's redevelopment of that project, and we're on board to design the parking structure for that project.
All right. So I'd like to offer Mr. Helmer as an expert in the field of engineering, and in particular related to the design of parking structures.
Do we have any questions? All right, the board recognizes you as an expert in structural engineering.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right. I guess the first question would be, why don't you just walk the board through this particular garage expansion and how it will work against the present garage?
Okay. This document that I have up here right now, although it may be very difficult to see, is A1.1, which was originally submitted. It was actually a resubmission to the board on April 18th.
Is that the last revised date, April 18th?
That's the last, yes, it is.
All right. Your permission, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to mark that as A5.
Is that the A5? Yes. Yes.
So what I'll do is I'll walk you through the functionality of the proposed garage and how it relates to the existing, and then I'll go into the exterior facade and the architectural intent. As was previously mentioned, the number of spaces in this particular garage right here, this expansion, is 594 spaces. And essentially what it does, it's 4 flat plates that extend off of the existing structure. So the comment was made earlier, the access, vehicular access, will be through the main parking structure. So vehicles will circulate as they do now into the parking structure, and then on each floor have the ability to extend out into the flat bay, which is currently designed as a one-way angled parking flat plate. So essentially you have ground and you have 4 supported levels. The functionality at the interface between the existing and the proposed lended itself very well from a vehicular standpoint, and that's one of the obvious reasons that we chose one of this locations right here. It's a precast parking structure expansion, so the intent is to match the existing when it comes to not only the architectural facade, which I'll review, but also the intent of the structural members, so that it appears and it feels as it is one parking structure for the user. One thing that we did when we took a look at the proposed garage, anytime you do an expansion onto an existing, you have to take a look at it from an overall zoning as well as building code implication standpoint. So what we did was, this particular layout is set up such that it is an open parking structure. I think that question came up earlier. So it does not require mechanical ventilation or an automatic sprinkler system. Okay. The fire protection system here is a manual dry standpipe system, that will be connected to the existing system. So the fire truck can come energize the system, and it not only energizes this system, but it also energizes the new proposed system in the garage. From a pedestrian standpoint, we have one stair tower in this particular corner, which I believe is the southwest corner of the structure. And because of the 300-foot walking distance requirement from any remote point, that was one of the reasons that the specific length was chosen. So any remote point on the parking garage for an open parking structure is 300-foot walking distance. So with this proposed structure and utilizing the existing stairs that we have in this structure, it meets that code requirement. In terms of the drive, I mentioned that it was angled. The module that we're using here is 53. We did choose 70-degree angle parking, which was the design waiver. 70-degree angle parking is a very practical angle for one way, but it also is the angle of the existing garage. So to the greatest extent, as I mentioned, we wanted to try to maintain the parameters between the two, so it was one like garage. The stall sizes, we have at 8'6" by 18 in the parking structure. Also, I wanted to mention the 70-degree. The drive aisle right now is 17 feet, and if you look at the zoning ordinance, basically indicates on an interpolation scale that it requires 18-foot drive aisle. Okay, we feel very comfortable that the modules as well as the drive aisle and angle will provide the patrons a good level of comfort and level of service.
What are the aisles in the existing?
Actually, it varies a little bit. The aisles in the existing, these two on the ramp, are very similar to the ones on the proposed. You have about 53-foot module here, as well as the proposed. So it ranges from 17 to 17.6, depending on the locations where you have a column, or in one particular case here, the existing parking garage has an expansion joint through it because of the width, so it has a different module dimension internally.
The width at the point of access and egress into this addition is what?
The width, yeah, into the point of is 20 feet.
Okay.
Right. So both the entry and the exit is 20 feet. The other critical parameter is always on a turn. Whenever a vehicle makes a straight run and then at the end makes the turn, we have 20 feet as well. It's important that we maintain that. So that generally is the functionality of the garage.
Let me ask you a few questions. Why did the university, with your assistance, select this location as compared to the other location that was shown on the master plan?
Well, I think this location, we analyzed this, and when we went through the initial feasibility study, we determined that it was going to be fairly cost-effective as well as efficient to design this flat plate onto the extension of the existing. Also, we felt that this was going to be as minimal impact. If you look at other locations on the university campus and trying to maintain the existing architecture, we felt that this particular location over the existing tennis courts would be minimal impact as well. Also, I think thirdly is to consolidate the parking. We mentioned that there was a net gain here of 550 plus spaces, but the consolidation of parking into one location, I think, would be a benefit as well.
Right. And I know you mentioned fire suppression. Was there any dialogue with any of the South Orange officials concerning fire issues?
Well, there was, and basically, anytime that we approach a project, we have to make sure that the fire department and whatever system we're employing here, meets the local regulations. So it was our intent initially to tap into the existing parking garage for the manual dry standpipe system.
So the existing parking garage is not sprinklered, it just has hose standpipes?
That's correct. That's right. And on that note, one of the things that was done in the existing that was a requirement was to maintain access to each level. You obviously have to have your fire department connections at the stair towers, but then you have to have them for 130 foot of spray and hose. So we had to make sure that within the parking garage, we had to have some areas that were striped out, that we would not provide any parking stalls, so that would provide direct access for the hookup.
All right, now, you mentioned the angled parking at 70 degrees, is that correct?
Correct.
And that matches the existing garage?
That matches the existing.
Right, and what is the village's standard that you're seeking a waiver from?
Well, the standard actually is 70 degree. If you look at the protocol, it ranges from 60, I think 65, and 70 is not included in that. Right now. So that's the waiver.
So that's the waiver.
That's correct.
So the village's standard is slightly, it's lower than 70, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you feel that that would be more appropriate on this garage?
I believe so.
All right,
yes.
just put your reasons on the record.
Well, I think, and based on my experience, and generally you've seen the parking industry over the years, especially the past with the implementation of sustainable practices and smaller hybrid vehicles, go to a smaller drive aisle in particular. We obviously have 8'6" stalls. But we feel that, we've done a few parking garages in the past 2 years that have implemented very similar design parameters, and the as-built result lended itself to be very acceptable.
What's the reason for the standard? Do you have any idea? I mean, is it a safety reason? Is it because the cars were bigger? I mean, you had the big Cadillacs? Or?
Well, you did have the big Cadillacs. And a lot of it is based on use group as well. Depending on the particular use, it could be 9-foot wide stalls. It could be 8'6" wide stalls. So the parking industry actually has changed over time. And actually in the past few years, I've mentioned, is starting to gravitate a little bit to more smaller vehicles, more total, especially with a lot of the tighter sites that projects are lending itself to. They are being tested out a little bit more.
The stall length is still standard, though?
Stall lengths, yes. Stall lengths are still standard, right. So you have 18-foot stall lengths in compact spaces, 8 by 16.
All right, was an effort made to make this expansion ADA compliant? Would you address that?
Yes. Again, one of the things with going back into the existing garage, we had to make sure that by putting the expansion on, it met building code requirements, but also we had to go back and we had to reconfirm the number of spaces that were in that garage. As we were touching this garage and adding a significant 33,000 square foot per level expansion, we had to make sure that we had enough ADA spaces in the garage that would look at it in totality. So one of the things that we did was go in and we had to restripe some areas where some stalls were actually not completely compliant. So we made those compliant and then added and made sure that the number of accessible spaces, including the vans, so we have 29 total accessible spaces, 4 of which are vans, are in the parking garage and located in closest proximity to the main stair elevator tower. A lot of them are congregated at the ground level, but it goes up so it's easily accessible to the stair and elevators.
There's an exit at the northwest corner of the new proposed addition out to the university grounds.
Oh, yes, right here.
No, the west, the other corner. Is there an exit there?
There's 2.
There is an exit right here, yes.
Okay.
Yep. And basically, I mean, this particular exit was meant to be for secondary means of egress per code. Yes.
So is there a circulation plan for how people exiting at that point can get to parts of the university, the pedestrian circulation?
Yeah, there is, yes. Yeah, that would be on the site civil plan. I think it was submitted.
Okay, great.
Right.
Now, given this location of the garage, does that have any implication for the 5-foot setback issue? Circulation, that sort of thing?
Well, the implication, I think, on the setback was as a result of narrowing the drive aisles, okay, which in still doing so and still narrowing the module and having the drive aisle at 17 feet, it was still an acceptable level of service, so.
Right, but do you have circulation running around this garage? And is the width necessary for that circulation?
Well, the only circulation that we have is from the pedestrian means of egress and coming around.
No, I meant vehicular circulation.
Oh, I'm sorry, no.
Yeah, no.
No.
Okay. Now, the height of the garage is 5 stories? Is that 4 levels?
Right. Grade plus 4 supported levels, and it was 51 feet
All right.
to the top level.
And how does that relate to the existing garage?
The existing garage is approximately 10 foot higher because this add-on, these flat levels here on the top level adds on to this particular level, but in the center of the existing garage, you actually go from the top level up approximately another 10 feet. You circulate and come back down. So in the center, there's an additional 10 feet. So at the interface, it's equal, but it's approximately 10 foot less on the overall.
All right. Now, would it have been practical to consider building a garage of less height or fewer levels and then building more later on? Would that have been practical?
I don't believe so. And the reason is, with this particular precast system, it's very difficult in the future to come back. So the intent was to try to maximize the number of spaces on the levels going up to the top level. Because if you built 4 and you were going to put 5 on in the future, if you were to erect that with a crane, it'd be very, very difficult from a logistical standpoint. So it made most sense from an economic standpoint as well to do it now.
Now, are you familiar with the reports that have been filed with the board indicating the level of need for this garage?
Yes.
All right. And based on those reports and your experience, do you believe that this garage is appropriately sized for the need?
I do.
All right.
I
Could
do
you
feel
just
that.
explain that a little bit to the board?
Yeah, I believe that, the reason that this was sized the way it was, I had mentioned grade plus the same number of levels as the existing. The length of the garage was maximized out as well from a functional level of service as well as structural standpoint. So in terms of the overall net gain of 550 spaces, we felt that at this time, based on the information that we knew from the other experts in the university, that this meets the need right now. So.
And the reports that have been submitted to the board indicate that the present garage is overtaxed. Is that
That's
fair
correct.
to say?
That's correct.
Is there some reasonable level of excess capacity in a garage that you would recommend?
Well, I think the recommendation in the industry would be approximately 90%. I heard someone say earlier there's a frustration factor about trying to hunt for spaces. So generally speaking, you would like to have that buffer. You see a lot of parking structures that have a full sign, LED sign, and generally they are monitored or registered at about 90% occupancy. Because at that point, beyond, you have cars that go through there and there's a frustration about trying to find spaces in the garage. So.
All right. And after this expansion is built, approximately how many spaces will there be in the garage in total?
In total, there'll be 1,871 spaces in total.
And that's a 550 space approximately increase over what's there now?
Correct, 556 space net gain.
Just one more line of questions. Could you show the board the renderings of what the garage will look like?
So I have 3 renderings The first one is a view from the baseball field, looking at the parking structure.
I'd like to mark this A6.
Overall, the intent architecturally, you know, we did look at, you know, how can we best add on 300-foot length of parking garage onto the existing, and what would that truly look like? And I think, you know, what we had concluded was that we have to try to complement the existing as best as possible, both in color of the existing as well as texture. So I had mentioned earlier that it's a precast parking garage, so the sandblast and the texture that is on the existing will be carrying through the proposed. The next one that I have is very similar look, a view from Ivy Hill Park.
Marking that A7.
And the last rendering is...
Can we go back to the other one just for a second?
Sure.
The ghost-like trees, would they be on the park property? Since you only have 5 feet, do they exist? Are there trees along that edge now?
Are they proposed just for the purpose of making the rendering look good?
That's in there.
I'd have to confirm that. I don't
All right.
These right here probably should be shown a little bit darker because they are existing.
Okay.
So
As was mentioned earlier.
Gotta use the microphone.
For the record, Mr. Garbini is speaking.
As was mentioned earlier, when we built the addition to that parking garage, we put Leland cypress along the existing section, and it's our intention to continue that and kind of break up the solidness of the structure.
But against the Ivy Park side, you only have 5 feet. So unless you're planting on somebody else's property.
In fact, that's what was approved. So I'm sure we gained that same approval.
By whom?
By the park, the county.
Oh.
So they're gonna let you plant on their property?
There's actually trees along that,
So they're
some of
gonna
that
stay?
section now.
Those trees are gonna stay?
Well, there are trees along this section, yes.
Okay.
And you'll plant new ones along the other section?
Yes.
The 5 foot? Wow. Is that documented anywhere? I don't recall hearing any testimony about that. Approval from Essex County Park.
This application is before the county planning board. It's just been filed recently, within the last... It's been filed about 2 weeks with the county planning board. Let me ask Mr. Garbini.
We can't approve that.
I see. Yes. I mean, what Mr. Garbini told me was that when they did the other garage, they have approval to plant along that property line, and they expect that they will get such approval for this expansion.
Thank you for that clarification.
Well, obviously, we can't, you're not asking us, I want to make sure the board members know, we're not being asked to approve your planting trees on another property.
We're just telling you what our...
There's actually an existing set of cypress along between the ball fields where that 5 foot area is. There's some trees there that are going to stay. The new trees that we're looking to plant are on the short end between the tennis courts and the building.
You have more room there.
We have much more room there, so we can get those on our property. Obviously, because the tennis courts are right up against that property line, we wouldn't be able to put them in the park. And there will be some discussions with the park, and this, you can see on this exhibit, this rendering, that's the end of the garage where the new trees are going to be planted. And we're going to have discussions with the county about potentially adding some more along the ball field side, the long side of the building.
Well, according to your site plan, there's a fair number of trees along that side on the county property that...
Correct, and all those are going to remain.
Nothing's going to happen to those, so...
These renderings, I don't see the fence in here. They look like the grass of the park comes right up to the structure. Is that what is that what I'm looking at?
I think it's just too far away.
You actually can't, the fence is actually there.
Yeah, it's just too far away.
You see a fence in there.
Yeah.
It's a very elegant fence.
And it wraps around that corner. So basically you have a fence that matches in color and texture.
Right along here you're talking, right here? Yeah.
Well, actually, it doesn't wrap around the corner.
No, it doesn't show to wrap around the corner.
Can call Mr. DiGiacinto back for this, please.
To the extent of that fence. To the extent.
This is the tennis courts.
We're only seeing
Yeah,
this.
there will be a fence. There is an existing fence on this property line that's not shown in this rendering.
Right.
And that existing fence is going to remain, that's on the property line currently.
This view is from where again?
This is basically standing in the tennis courts of Ivy Hill.
Infield right there.
But you're leaning, you're kind of looking from,
No, you're.
this is the ball field,
You're right here.
the Seton Hall's ball field.
Yeah.
I see.
The existing deck's in the background.
Right.
So this is the long axis and the short side against the tennis courts.
You're looking this way. So you should see the fence.
What's that exhibit again?
So those
It's not marked yet.
So those people,
That one, let me just mark that A8 if I might.
Mr. Don, those people are standing in Ivy Hill Park or standing on Seton Hall property?
Close. They might be right on the property line. Because that view, if you're looking at this site plan, is, they're probably, they're looking at this corner. So they're in this vicinity.
Right. But I guess what's funny is the view. I like that view, right? But it makes it look like the garage is sitting continuously in the park, as opposed to there being a 9.5-foot tall
Right.
cyclone fence surrounding a garage against the park.
Right.
Which is a very different look. I like that look. Yeah, I'm standing over there.
Referring back to the site plan, we're off to the western corner, sort of in the tennis courts, kind of looking at this corner of the building so that you're catching both sides as well as the portion of this existing in the background.
Do you have a view from the southwest? Can you put that one back up? Or the south? There's where at least they should like
So now,
Basically from inside Ivy Hill Park?
yeah,
Yeah,
now,
that's the
now I'm
view.
fully in the park.
Yeah, you'd be fully in the park.
And where's the fence in that drawing?
I don't see it either.
It's not there.
Yeah.
No, the fencing is actually not shown in this. So you'd have the fence running along this whole length at 9 feet, 9.5 feet, so you'd be
Up there.
somewhere about up the first level.
And the fence you're proposing would be, you said a continuation of the fence around the tennis courts, which is a large chain link, like a chain
It's a
link.
chain link. We're going with the small openings, which is the anti-climb
Right.
openings, as opposed to what's allowable with the 8-foot with the roll. We went with the 9.5 tight mesh so that it can't be climbed.
And there's going to be a roll on the top?
No, we're not proposing a roll. The ordinance allows 8-foot height with a 3-foot roll. We're proposing 9.5 straight up.
That would be scary. I'm sorry, did you mention a color? Is it
We were looking at black.
black?
Black vinyl
Black
coated.
vinyl.
I don't even know what that would look like.
Well, it would look a lot different than that picture, my question.
Mr. Adler, you have a
Yeah, you
question?
just get, tight mesh would be looking from a distance, more of a solid fence or solid wall than a looser mesh.
Yes, it's going to definitely look tighter and more solid than the standard openings.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions about that, but I think they're planner questions, frankly. They're not about the building of the garage, they're about how the site fits together.
So do we have other questions for Mr. Helmer in a structural engineering perspective?
I just have a couple quick ones. The plans that we have, this A1.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. Do you want me to finish my questions first? or-
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to go through some other aspects of the
Certainly.
professionals' reports.
Please.
Do you have the Omlin report that was referred to before?
I do.
And directing your attention to paragraph 2 on page 2. So you've already covered that, fire suppression?
That's correct.
All right. There's mention made in paragraph 3 of the footings and foundations.
Right. There would, yeah, the footings and foundations, there would be no conflict with any underground storage detention within the garage. So it's coordinated, so it's no impact.
All right, paragraph 6, you provided the
Correct.
the boards. About paragraph 8, lighting.
Yeah, paragraph 8, the lighting that is in the existing garage is a 250-watt high-pressure sodium fixture, which is, frankly, it's rarely used in parking garages anymore. And what we're proposing in the new garage is energy-efficient LED fixtures, which at this point in the past year, the LED fixtures have come a long way to be applied to outdoor parking structure use. In the detail, essentially, for the top level of the garage, lighting will be located. The lighting will be located on the interior column line, on the interior walls. So there will be minimal light spillage over the sides, and we're going to make sure of that, both on the top level as well as the existing level. And that pole is a 15-foot high pole. The current poles on the existing garage are 20-foot high poles. Okay, so there's a difference of 5 feet difference. 15, yeah. So the high-pressure sodium on the existing garage is somewhat of a yellowish light. The LED will be a little more uniform white light. But being white, we have to make sure that we take the necessary precautions to minimize that spillage as well.
All right, and then I think you've covered most of the points that I would have asked you about, but what about 24, about a photometric analysis?
Yeah, number 24 basically was the facade. Essentially, the light fixtures that we originally showed in the original submission showed facade lighting on this elevation, and that is no longer the case. There's no facade lighting that is necessary there. So that was the difference in the photometrics that was shown.
All right, and then turning to the higher Gruhl report. I'm seeing, I think you've covered most everything. I think I have no further questions. I mean, I think most of the points in that report have been addressed by one witness or the other.
Ms. Gruhl?
May I just ask about the distinction between the lights and the existing and the LED?
Right.
How difficult is it to replace the existing with the LED lights? I would assume that to a certain extent they are more energy efficient, and in the long term that they would be more cost effective. Plus, is there going to be a major, I assume there is, a major difference in the way that it looks between the existing, the yellow, more yellow, and then or white.
It will be some,
Very-
you're right, it will be somewhat of a noticeable difference, because the yellow high-pressure sodium light is a softer light, and the LED is a little bit more white of a light, kind of like the previous
You need to use
version.
that microphone.
I'm sorry. So the metal halides are also a white light. So basically, the industry has gone from high-pressure sodium, yellow, white light, metal halides, T8 fluorescents, and now LED. So there will be a little bit of difference. There's no plan right now to retrofit the existing garage.
Is that a difficult undertaking or not?
It would be. I mean, it would be a fairly difficult, fairly expensive undertaking to retrofit all of the lights in the existing to match what's in the proposed. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Daly?
I have a couple quick questions. The plans that we have, which I think is the one that you're referring to, A 1.1 dated 4/18/13. Our plans, you said the stalls were 8'6" wide, but these plans call them out as 9'1".
Is that on the top level? That you're looking at?
Ground tier architectural plan. Well, yeah, well, I mean, the typical spaces are 9'1", which
So on the typical levels, we do have 8'6", and that may be generally they are 8'6". I'd have to check the striping dimension on that.
And the other question is more of a logistic question. Where's the crane going to sit when they're putting this up, on the soccer field?
Well, the crane actually, when they erect this, the crane sits within the footprint of the structure. So what happens is, to stabilize the structure, the crane will sit in the parking garage in one bay of it, and it'll erect 2 full bays, full height, and then it'll move its way out. So they have to, I think, as of right now, there's 3 or 4 different positions or phases of which they would do that. So, yeah.
What about other staging? So is someone going to talk about staging at another expert, or is that?
I mean,
Because these garages are like a kit of parts. I mean,
That's
it's
right.
like Tinker Toys. So I guess the
That's
question
right.
is, where are all the toys sitting till they're put up?
Off-site. They're sitting off-site, and generally what happens is you get about 20 to 22, 23 pieces a day that's erected. So you do have trucks that will be coming in here, and we have been discussing that with the construction manager and the logistics and the safety aspects of that. But yeah, you'll have trucks that'll come in here, crane will pick off, the crane will sit in the footprint and move its way 1, 2, 3, I believe 4 positions, and then complete.
So you're talking about 20 trucks? Is a piece per truck?
I'm not sure exactly how many per day, how many truck runs there may be, but
Okay.
generally in a day, in a work day, an efficient precaster can erect just over 20 pieces, double T's, picks in a day.
And you'll excavate the site, I assume, to prepare for foundation footings, et cetera?
That's correct.
And you'll access that via the ball fields?
Well, that'll be accessed from the same location that the crane would come in as
I
well.
see, okay.
Yeah. So what'll happen, the foundation will start, foundation will move along, then the crane will come in and the crane will be assembled,
Yeah.
and then follow suit with the foundations as the foundations are installed and
So
cured.
there'll be no storage of material on the site?
No, not to my
Either
knowledge.
not the excavated material or the material to be placed?
Well, the excavated material, that's a good question about that. No, nothing. Everything is off.
Okay. That's a lot of trucks, concrete and excavation and pieces.
I just want to make sure that the trucks coming are not going down Center Street, because I don't want them rumbling by my house.
Oh.
Have other questions?
I do, but I'll wait for our engineer expert.
Okay, Mr. Keller.
Just a couple of questions. Number 2, you just said you addressed it, but could you explain in more detail how are you providing, I know you're connecting the standpipes in the new garage to the existing garage. Does the existing garage have the appropriate backflow prevention to prevent cross-contamination?
Well, the existing garage, essentially, because it's a manual dry standpipe system, backflow prevention is not required. So it just has to have a location where it's drained. So what we did was, to accommodate that, we tapped into the existing at a location that was most convenient, okay? Carried a pipe over to the proposed, and then put our risers per code in there. So now that what you have with the proposed and the existing, you have one interconnected system.
Just looking at the circulation within the garage, I had the pleasure of being in the garage last week when we had a meeting over at the university, so I got a first-hand experience of driving through the garage. When you enter the garage, there's a ramp going up to the floors, and then you have various circulations. Can you explain why, as you come up, and I'll say north is to the right, south is to the left. So you come up the ramp, you make the left, and you're running along that western parking bay. You get to the next to last parking bay, and you have to make a left turn to go down the parking bay. Could you explain why you feel that's an appropriate path to get into the new garage instead of reversing the flow on that last bay, so that you come up and drive right into the garage, the new garage, and then make a counterclockwise swing through the garage?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So right now, what you're saying is come in and go straight through, and then come back out.
Instead of coming down to that last one where you have to make a left, and you got to make a 180 through the cut through, and then make the left into the new garage. It just feels awkward.
Yeah. Okay.
But
yeah. I mean, essentially, I mean that is an option, to do that. We felt that this particular flow would have been more conducive to the existing, especially at the connection points. But we can certainly take a look at that.
It just seems, other than the end bays, all the ones you're circulating to the left and around, and then you're faced with trying to see that sign that says you got to go this way, and most people aren't looking up at the ceiling,
right? Except
us engineers, because that's what we do. You're looking for that parking space of where you're trying to get to.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, that's something we can certainly look at.
The LED fixtures that you're proposing, and maybe in the plan I didn't notice it, what was the color that you were looking at? There's 3,000, 4,000 Kelvin. Were you going towards the yellower side? Is there flexibility in the color that you're picking?
The color of the fixture itself?
The light, because when you say it's an LED light, you can have a very harsh, cold light, or you can have something closer to daylight.
That's right, and I think that, we've evaluated LED fixtures, and there are harsh lights out there. It would be our intent to try to, it's still going to be a white light, but to try to soften it up as much as possible. And I think our next step, in terms of materials, just like we would do with the facade, would be to get samples of the fixtures, and set them up and see what they truly look like.
What I would request is that you provide what your intent is as far as the color of the LED, because I think in a structure like that where it's confined, having too harsh a light is going to be have an adverse impact as somebody drives through the garage.
That's true.
Especially when they're going from the orangey high pressure sodium to something that is going to be different.
Exactly.
You want to minimize that differential.
I agree. We'll take a look at that.
All right, thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, why don't we take a quick break at this point here? I'd like to go to around 11 or so, unless there's some particular reason to keep going.
We can finish the witness.
Well, I mean, how much longer are we going to go with this witness?
I only have one more.
You have one more question? Do you all have any more? Okay, then let's go ahead.
Okay.
Mr. Scott.
I'm going to say that I'm a little, I lack sufficient knowledge in this area. I have some knowledge with regard to parking and traffic circulation in general, both indoor and outdoor parking lots. But the one thing that concerns me, or that I'd like to hear more about, is choke points, points of congestion within the parking garage itself, and circulation at the transition between the parking garage and the area outside of it, and any changes that you may have made to that transition area to outside the parking lot or parking garage, and also your professional experience with regard to the size of the lot and the size of the access and egress points, and what that does with regard to congestion and circulation.
Yeah. Well, I think to answer your first question about congestion and any choke points, I mean, one benefit of this garage is its one-way configuration. A lot of times you see two-way drive aisles where there is conflicts, vehicular conflicts.
Sure.
So I think that, dimensionally speaking, the drive aisles as well as the end bays, I think you find that there's minimal conflict points within there. So I don't really believe that there's any real choke points in there.
I kind of thought right at the elbow there that there might be one.
You mean right here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the 20, as we have it right now, that 20 feet is a fairly, I would say, generous.
Right, so you widen the aisle to 20 feet, not just for the egress, but also the aisle in that section.
In that section, right. That's correct. Yeah, because on the straight, typically the difference between a straight and a turn, you want at least 3 or 4 more feet in there. Right. And this isn't even a hairpin type of turn. This is just a small jog. This one's a little bit more of a difficult turn, but by having 20 foot in there through that whole area, it's
you've got basically 100 plus spaces per floor coming out into that elbow, where cars will be backing out of parking spaces, and so you've allotted additional space to make sure that reduces the conflicts related to that.
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. And what about the entrances and exit to the overall facility?
Right here.
And how has that been changed to accommodate the roughly 40% increase in size?
Well, the nice thing about it hasn't been changed at all. It has the same vehicular access at grade that you would go into. I mean, in terms of the capacity of the garage and the net gain of 550 spaces, it's not a controlled garage where you have a gate, where it's an open, free flow parking structure. So that helps considerably.
And in your professional experience, the number of cars being stored by this facility are easily accommodated by a non-gated entrance?
Yes.
The size that's been provided?
That's correct.
Okay. Because it was designed to accommodate the existing building. Right. So one would think that would be appropriate, but to increase the capacity of the garage increases the flow through that design. It doesn't change the required size.
No, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and it'll perform fine with the additional spaces in there. Yes.
Okay.
Now, if it was closed, if it was a closed system, greater level of analysis would need to be done in terms of queuing outside as well as inside.
Right,
So.
it doesn't create any issues out on the interaction with the street?
No,
Or to
no.
the circulation, vehicular circulation outside of the garage?
We don't believe so.
Okay.
Yes.
And then lastly, this regarding the time inside the garage that it might take a car to circulate looking for a space. There's a significant increase in the amount of time, I would think. Have you done any analysis with regard to that? With regard to the whole angst factor, when somebody's looking for a space, my experience is they tend to speed up when they don't see one and they've circulated a few times.
Well, yeah, in particular here, right? That's what you're saying, yeah.
Right.
So, no, I mean, we have done analysis. We've been in the parking garage many of times during different times during the day, whether that be in the morning, noon, or later, in the day, and during the peak times. And, I think that, there will be 550 space net gain is going to afford more spaces, and I go back to that 90% type of rule there.
Right.
I mean,
But you do have a longer travel time.
Yes, yeah, you do.
Do you know how much longer? Have you done any analysis of that?
I have not at this point, no.
Let's ask the question another way. What are you going to do to make it attractive when you get in to go to the furthest point? Instead of going up, everything is taken, then come back down, then go there.
I'm sorry, what was your
You have two garages.
Right.
The new one and the existing. If no existing, you're going to go to the top. So you're going to add the new one. So what are you going to do, or what have you done to make it attractive instead of going all the way up, it's filled, come back down, and then go there?
Well, I mean, you have the ability to circulate around on each level, and I think that once this is built, I mean, you're gonna see a human factor that people are gonna get accustomed to it. They're gonna understand where the spaces are during the certain points of the day. I mean, that's based on my experience. So, whether it's morning, noon, or at night, you're gonna know where there is spaces in the garage.
But why not, instead of doing that, put some indication, like, guess what, like,
well,
based on the traffic pattern, you can
understand.
quickly tell I'm full.
Oh, that's a
So
good point.
someone go up there, why not just say, the first floor, second floor, filled, why not?
Well, that's a good point. In particular, I mean, we have discussed that. Nothing has been implemented at this point in time. To the point that you're circulating in this garage here, and you're going to come out through the flat. If this is fairly occupied, say on level 4, we have discussed that. Would a potential indicator to, the patrons, be of benefit so that then they can circulate and go up to the next level. Nothing's been finalized yet in that regard, though.
I hate to follow on Mr. Descala's one question, but I'm going to, Mr. Chairman. We had testimony earlier that there are certain times of day that are peak parking times and peak turnover times. And one was the transition between day students and night students when there's overlap. And it sounds like you sort of get an exodus of the day students and the income of the night students around a certain time. Are you expecting that at that time, I think this goes back to the question so ably and long raised by Mr. Descala, that there's going to be queuing in there. You're going to have a lot of people trying to come out at once and come in at once, and that's going to back up into you have added, even at 90% load, 400 cars in that unit, right?
Yeah.
You all have to get in, go up, find their place, and come out the same gate.
Well, that's true, and I think that, because there's a free flow entry in and out, there's not a lot of stopping points
But there are stopping points if I'm backing out of my space.
Well,
people are waiting.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, and it may be sporadic depending on where you're located, but that would perform just like many other garages, that would have that peak time.
Right.
And I think what's a benefit, I think that again, I mentioned that there are no gates there, so that you come out, you hit a stop sign, and you can just pass out or you can just drive right in. So at the point right now, when you drive into the garage, you can just drive right in and straight down the aisle and go right up the ramp. So,
I've parked in that garage many times, taking my kids for swim lessons. I have a suspicion that you're going to get jammed up there, but I don't know the science, if there is a science behind this, so I really can't knowledgeably criticize, and I think at some point you're the expert, and you're saying that the way this is designed with that exit and that entrance, that it will work properly.
Yes.
It's now on record for having said so.
Well, I mean, not to be uncaring, but if it backs up, it's on their campus.
Yeah, right.
Right. I will say that I've done a couple of projects that have big parking garages, and the big backup in a parking garage is if you have a gate.
Is if you have a gate.
If you don't have a gate, you know, at end of a workday in an office building, yeah, it's a little slow, but it's not like, you know, you're waiting to pay and it backs up and you're, you know, 4 levels up waiting for the traffic to circulate down.
It is there.
Other questions?
I don't know what your preference is. There's 2 more witnesses.
Okay, so we have 2 more witnesses. What do we want to do? Let me poll the board here. I think we should take, at the very least, if we're going to continue, we should take a short break. Generally, we try to end around 11 or so, just because the quality of our analysis, if not the experts, deteriorates. What do you think we should do? You want to march through the 2 experts? And no?
What are the experts?
Who are the what do you
Well,
have?
there's an expert who has looked at the current need for parking, and they've done parking counts and looked at the garage and that sort of thing. So we wanted to put on that testimony.
Why don't we take one more expert, but let's take a very quick break. Okay?
And then after that, we have the planner to give the...
That's going to be a long, that will be long. So we're going to wait for the planner for the next session.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Question, make sure everybody else
With Mr. Coakley during the break.
Right, and I think we agreed that this next witness would go beyond 11 o'clock. It's not sensible to start him in that circumstance.
So then you have asked to see if perhaps we could arrange a special meeting?
Yes.
Okay, so
Mr. Chairman, I think the first step is to ask the availability of Village Hall.
Jetta, do you know the availability of Village Hall? Do you have a calendar there? Yes.
I think maybe the 25th or 27th.
You think maybe, or you know it's open?
I believe those is open, but I still have to double check.
25th is a Tuesday,
Yeah.
or the 27th is a Thursday? Okay, the 25th?
Either are fine for me.
I can do the 25th.
What day is that?
The 25th, Tuesday the 25th.
I'm unavailable on both dates.
Is anybody else unavailable?
I'm unavailable on the 27th.
So, I'm unavailable on the 27th. But I am available on the 25th.
So then, 25th, Mr. Dwyer? Is the 25th? Can we do the 25th?
Yes.
Okay, so we will schedule a special, now, do you need to confirm this, Jetta? You're not absolutely sure?
Right, I'll have to confirm it.
Confirm it, so you'll confirm with the applicant as well as communicate with the rest of the board members that this date is when we're going to have a special meeting of the Board of Adjustment at 7 p.m. on Tuesday, June 25th.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you. See you then.
All right, thank you. Is there anything else? Oh, for the, y'all are done, thank you. The financial disclosures. So, have you done yours, Mr. Semper? Yeah, you had a guilty look.
I had trouble with that final electronic thing, but I handed in a paper copy, but I will go back and...
I tried to hand in a paper copy and I had my knuckles wrapped. We have to do it online now.
No, I'll try again.
Do we have a record of who's given them? Like, do you know if you got mine? I submitted it.
Jetta sent you an email that describes the instructions. It didn't work?
I had trouble getting it to work quick.
Well, you know, you may have to, if it doesn't. All right, so this meeting's adjourned.
No, and I don't.